Here we are then, in the land of Sumer and Akkad, the cradle of civilization, the first place on earth where humans dared to dream of immortality. The year is 1800 BCE and you are about to enter the great city of Babylon. But do not be fooled by its size. At this point in history, it is a provincial town of no more than a few thousand people. The houses are small, the streets are narrow, the mud brick walls are unadorned, and the baked clay that makes up the roof sag under the weight of centuries. The king's palace is a cluster of rooms made from sun-dried brick, no different from those of his subjects, and the great temples are little more than sheds, leaking and dilapidated. What sets Babylon apart is the presence of these 7 crookedly stacked towers known as the Ziggurat of Babel. They rise 80 feet into the air, 250 cubits according to the chroniclers, and are capped with a shrine housing the city's patron deity, the goddess Ishtar. Every day, priests trudge up the crumbling stairs to offer her sacrifices, and every evening they sound a bronze trumpet from its summit to announce the passing of time itself. Life here revolves around the rhythms of the fields. When the barley and sesame are ripe for harvest, men leave the city to reap the golden grain. Women sort the beans and lentils, shell the nuts and press the grapes into vinegar. Then, when the soil is flooded by the spring thaw, everyone returns to Babylon, bringing produce to trade in the agora and gossip about their neighbors. While the children play in the streets and dogs scavenge for scraps, old men sit in the shade of the ziggurat, arguing over politics and poetry. Lovers meet under the colonnades and watchmen keep an eye out for thieves and stray elephants. One such watchman is Hammurabi, a young man of indeterminate origin, like most people in this city. Life has been good to him so far. He had a son when he was 13, a daughter when he was 21. His wife bore them both at age 14, which means she's barely older than his son now, though there are rumors that she's barren. By the gods, if that is true, Hammurabi will have to find another wife and send his firstborn daughter to live in the temple, just as his father did. He pushes the thought away. Tonight, he'll celebrate his good fortune with a jug of spiced cider and the company of his friends. After all, life is good. He walks down to the market where vendors hawk their wares. The scales are rigged and the wine is sour. 2 old men quarrel over the price of a donkey, a merchant haggles with a farmer over a basket of dates, and a group of children roll a hoop down the street while chanting rhymes. The city may be small, but there is plenty of business to go around. And tomorrow, the river will overflow and bring new life to the fields, new prosperity to the people, and new clay to build new houses and new temples. For what is life but the endless cycle of birth and death and rebirth? Hammurabi reaches his favorite tavern and pushes open the door. Inside, men sit cross-legged on the floor, drinking from wooden goblets and playing a game with pieces of bone and a small ball. On the wall, a faded mural shows 2 wrestlers locked in combat. Above them, a shelf holds a rack of harps and lyres. The owner, a fat woman with henna'd hands, pours him a glass of cider. It's sweet and tangy, spiced with cinnamon and cloves. Hammurabi pays her with a gold earring and takes his seat. Soon enough, he is surrounded by friends, swapping stories and jokes. One of them, Adoni, speaks of the distant lands to the east, of rolling hills and a great wall that keeps out the barbarians. Another, Abil, talks of a mysterious tribe of giants to the west, whose heads are shaped like triangles and whose eyes glow red like hot coals. Hammurabi listens patiently. Though he himself has never left Babylon, he has heard rumors of a vast empire ruled by a warrior queen, an empire so powerful that it could conquer the whole world. As the night wears on, the men grow silent, each lost in his own thoughts. Outside, the trumpet from the ziggurat heralds the coming of dawn. Hammurabi finishes his drink, throws one last glance at the mural of the wrestlers, and heads home to join his family for breakfast. The oil lamp is still burning in the corner of his house, and his wife and children have already risen to greet him. Life is good. But, as the sun climbs higher in the sky, he remembers the unfinished irrigation canals, the fields that need tending, and the new taxes that must be collected. With a sigh, he throws himself onto his mat and closes his eyes. The work of building a city never ends. Welcome to the first episode of our series. Each week, we'll bring you new tales from history's greatest cities. Together, we will move through 4 chapters. First, we will walk a day in the life of an ordinary Babylonian. We will discover why such a day would quickly wear us down. Then, we will explore the reign of Hammurabi, the king who etched his authority into history. From there, we will wander among the mysteries of the Hanging Gardens and the lost Ziggurats. We'll pause to wonder at what was real and what was legend. And finally, we will step into the palace, the seat of privilege and ceremony, where scribes, priests, and nobles shape the destiny of the city. For now, simply allow your mind to settle, as though you are about to fall into step with a long-lost Babylonian morning. The sounds of the modern world slip away, and the murmur of a river, the rustle of reeds, and the distant calling of merchants begin to replace them. You awake in the stifling heat of a summer's day, the air thick and heavy with humidity. A donkey brays in the distance, a dog barks, a baby cries. Your wife stirs beside you, and you know that soon she will rise to begin her endless chores. The clay walls of your house offer little protection from the sun's relentless glare and the night's chill. There is no glass to admit the light without the heat or keep out the flies that buzz incessantly around your head. You step outside to answer nature's call and find relief in the splash of cool water from a public fountain. Life here in the city of Babylon seems to have little rhythm except the rising and setting of the sun. The streets are a maze of narrow passages choked with pedestrians, vendors, and their wares. The air is thick with the smells of baking bread, roasting meat, and the pungent spices of the merchants' exotic goods. The midday heat forces everyone indoors. Shutters are drawn, curtains of woven reeds hang across doorways. The streets are nearly empty. Even the dogs have sought somewhere to cool off. The only sound is the murmur of the Euphrates as it flows past the city. In the late afternoon, people begin to stir once more. Men, women, and children fan themselves to catch any scrap of the day's precious breeze. Old men sit in the shade telling stories and playing games. The sun dips below the horizon, and with it, the temperature begins to drop. Families gather in the evenings to eat simple meals of bread, onions, and fish from the river. Soon, the sky is ablaze with stars. The moon, a thin crescent, hangs like a silver sickle against the velvet darkness. The nights are filled with music, laughter, and the scent of jasmine. Lovers whisper sweet nothings as they stroll along the river bank. Life in ancient Babylon might seem exotic, but the truth is its rhythms and routines were much like our own, its sights and sounds, its joys and sorrows, its hopes and fears. In many ways, Babylon was just a typical city, yet in others, utterly extraordinary. To really understand this city, we need to understand how it came to be. So, let's meet the man who made Babylon great. You enter the great court of King Hammurabi, the sun beating down on the white marbled floor. Around you, crowds mill about, all eager to plead their case before the mighty monarch. Hammurabi sits on his throne inlaid with lapis lazuli and gold, his eyes scanning the crowd. He knows that today, like every day, there will be those who seek justice, some who seek revenge. As the crowds thin and the police subside, a hush falls over the court. One by one, the petitioners step forward, each bearing their burden, each seeking Hammurabi's impartial judgment. A farmer claims his field has been flooded by his neighbor's negligent irrigation. A merchant accuses a tradesman of delivering faulty goods. A father demands retribution for his daughter's stolen virginity. The king listens intently, his expression unreadable. When the accused are found guilty, he does not hesitate to deliver his punishment. The guilty are dragged away to face the consequences of their actions. After a lifetime of such judgments, Hammurabi feels a weariness in his bones. He, too, has limits. He rises from his throne and, with the help of his attendants, begins the long process of divesting himself of his royal robes. Beneath the weight of the crown jewels, his shoulders ache. His wrists, chafed by the golden bracelets, throb. As the servants dress him in simpler clothes, the king allows himself a rare moment of relaxation. He thinks back over his long reign. When he took the throne some 40 years ago, Babylon was a minor city. Now it is the capital of a vast empire stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. His armies have conquered all comers. His officials have codified the laws of the land. His scholars have recorded his deeds on clay tablets. Soon, he thinks, his deeds will be carved in stone. It has been a good reign, but there are challengers at his borders, ambitious rulers eager to carve their own names in history. The king stretches out on his couch, the weight of the world heavy on his chest. He must rest now, but when he wakes, he knows his duties will not wait. We hope you enjoyed this first episode of our series. Join us next time as we explore the legendary gardens of Babylon. What were they? Where were they located? And were they real or just a myth? You wake up in a reed hut. Now imagine that you're not alone. Imagine that there are 6 other people in this space with you, 7 total, and all of them are men. You probably assume that you're gay, right? That you've been repressed for so long that even your subconscious mind has decided to come out to you. But what if I told you that this was normal? Not just normal, but the norm. What if you were straight? In fact, what if you were the odd one out? Welcome to ancient Babylon. It's hot, crowded, and very spicy. Back then, it wasn't uncommon for groups of men to share beds. In fact, most men did. And it wasn't because they were gay. At least, not necessarily. It was because they had to. Men were considered the property owners, the providers, the heads of the household. And women, well, they were seen as valuable assets, too valuable to be allowed to wander around freely. So, instead, they were kept under close watch at home by other women, their mothers, sisters, aunts, or daughters. That means that if you were a man, you were expected to go out into the world to make money, and you didn't do that alone. You took your sons or nephews or younger brothers with you, taught them the family trade, and made sure they learned how to survive in a big city. After all, you weren't making money just for yourself, but for everyone in your household. So, it makes sense that men would share beds. There were 2 main reasons for it. The first is that back then, a lot of families were poor, at least by our definition. Most people lived in small houses with several people sharing a single bed. If you were rich, you might have an extra room, but in that case, you'd probably use it to store goods, or maybe have another family living in it to help you out with work around the house or in the fields. So sleeping alone was a luxury. The second reason is that, again, women were kept indoors. This meant that if you were a man, your options were limited when it came to finding a partner. You couldn't just meet someone at the bar and go home with them, so to speak. The way it worked was that if you wanted to get married, your mother or whoever was in charge of your household would arrange it for you. They'd essentially set you up with someone they knew and trusted, which meant that you were unlikely to ever be alone when you were intimate. You may have had your best friends over for dinner, and then afterwards, they'd all pile into your room to hang out until dawn. Maybe you'd play some music and drink some wine and tell jokes and listen to stories. Maybe you'd gamble or practice wrestling moves. Or maybe, just maybe, you'd take turns having sex with your male friends. Now, I know that can seem bizarre, but remember, these men weren't necessarily gay any more than you are when you dream about being chased by giant spiders. It was just something that happened because of the societal norms of the time. And besides, there were plenty of straight men who preferred to stay abstinent. In a way, it was easier for them. Without female companionship, they could focus on their careers, climb higher up the social ladder, and make more money for their households. It wasn't easy to get ahead in ancient Babylon. You had to work hard to make your house a nice place to live and provide for your family. So some men chose to put all their efforts into that instead of relationships. In fact, some may have chosen to avoid relationships because while women were kept indoors, men were allowed to have harems. Prostitution was legal and commonplace. So, if you wanted to, You could visit a temple prostitute or take a high-class prostitute home for the night. Again, it was just a product of the times. In ancient Babylon, just like today, there were plenty of ways to meet people for hookups. So why bother with the complications of a long-term relationship? So yeah, the ancient Babylonians were into threesomes, but that doesn't mean they were gay. It just means they were people. People trying to get by, trying to make the best of a complicated world and trying to find happiness however they can. We may think their customs are weird or their morals are questionable, but really, they were just people like us. Well, maybe not that much like us, but definitely people. You have chosen wisely, young scribe, to take up the stylus and the clay tablet, for this is a respectable trade. To be a scribe is to be part of the elite. Not everyone can read and write. In fact, most people could not care less about such pursuits. For them, life is too short or maybe too hard to bother with such refinements. What use does a farmer have for books when the fields need tending? What use does a merchant have for scrolls when there are caravans to organize? What use does a soldier have for tablets when there are battles to be won? Scribes, they make the world go round. Scribes record births and deaths, marriages and divorces. Scribes tally up taxes and keep accounts. Scribes draft contracts and issue edicts. Scribes are the only ones allowed to put ideas down on paper so that others may read them. Without scribes, there would be no way to keep track of anything at all. There would be no way to preserve history. To be a scribe is to wield power in Babylon, where the river Euphrates runs like ink across the land, carrying life-giving silt from the mountains of the east. The streets are still muddy from a recent flooding of the Euphrates, a blessing and a curse. The fertile silt allows crops to grow, yet the water seeps into everything, turning roads into muck. You adjust your simple woolen tunic, lifting it slightly, trying to keep it from being soiled, though the effort is mostly in vain. Your occupation is not glamorous. You are a scribe's assistant, one of many who spend their days bent over clay tablets, etching lines and wedges to keep account of grain. Each morning you arrive at the courtyard of your master, the chief scribe, whose importance is shown by the size of his house and the number of his slaves. The air is filled with the smells of the city, damp earth mixed with smoke from cooking fires and the sweet, cloying stench of date palms. As the son of a minor official, you have known plenty of hardship in your life. At least this job gives you steady work and a regular wage. It is not easy work, mind you. Hours are long and the pay is not great, but it is honest work. And now that you are learning to read and write, you know how valuable your services will be. It's a good life, really, better than most, especially since you've managed to get yourself a patron, a powerful nobleman who takes an interest in your development and has become a sort of second father to you. He dines with your family, dispenses favors on your behalf and even gives you extra work, which means more money. It also means leaving the house at night, hurrying through the dark streets to his house, where you spend the night sleeping next to his son, both of you curled around the meager warmth of a clay brazier. Yes, life is good, especially compared to those poor wretches who sleep out in the open, the beggars and the criminals, the people who make the city run, the farmers, the merchants, and the soldiers, and those unfortunate enough to fall out of favor with the king. Your fellow scribes, they come from wealthy families, sons and daughters of nobles and priests. They do important work, keeping records of royal edicts and the laws of the land. They maintain the archives of the courts and the temples, making sure every temple tax and every grain offering is recorded. They draft contracts for merchants and keep track of shipments coming into the city. Life is good if you're a scribe, not just because you're part of the elite, but because knowledge is power and literacy is the key to advancement. You might start out recording barley and dates, but with enough experience, you could end up recording bloodlines and legacies. With enough experience, you could become a court scribe, an official historian, or even a judge. Anything is possible if you can read and write. The sun beats down on your back as you trudge home from another long day of tallying grain. Your patron's house is large and impressive, but it offers little respite from the heat. Even the thick walls and high ceilings can't keep out the glare and the oppressive heat. You think about those poor wretches who don't even have the shade of a wall to shelter them. You think about the beggars who sleep under the bridges, the criminals who hide in the sewers. You think about those unlucky enough to incur the king's displeasure, the ones who sleep with the fishes in the river. You are a lucky man, you think, a very lucky man indeed. The years pass and your skills increase. Soon you are working for the king himself, charged with the care and preservation of the royal library. You have books from every corner of the empire, stories of gods and monsters, histories and how-to manuals, poetry and propaganda. You have books on war and peace, on farming and finance, on medicine and magic. You have books on love and death, on life and the universe. You are surrounded by the sum total of human knowledge, and you are its humble servant. Welcome to my humble abode. Let me show you around. The walls are made of mud brick, the floors of beaten earth. The ceiling is low and the light is dim because the sun has trouble reaching us. We are tucked away at the end of a long corridor that connects the palace to the library. A good scribe needs a quiet place to work. The corridor helps with that. Most folks don't find us unless they're looking for something specific. That suits me just fine. My favorite part of the workroom is the clay pit. There's nothing quite like burying your hands in cool, wet clay. It's so plentiful here that we have a whole room to ourselves. Other scribes might have to go out to the hills to dig it up, but we don't have to do that. Someone else does that for us. All we have to do is flatten it out and keep it damp enough to mark without cracking. Not too hard, not too soft. It's a delicate balance, but once you get it right, it's easy enough to keep going. We use these tablets to practice on. They're cheap, and they dry quickly, so you can make lots of mistakes on them. Once you've got the hang of it, you move onto the stone tablets. Those are much harder to mess up. When you press a wedge into the clay, you can't erase it. You can't even carve out a little divot and refill it with wet clay. Once a mistake is pressed into a stone tablet, it stays there forever. So, you have to get it right the first time. That's why we practice on tablets first. Our tools are simple, just a reed and some string. We cut the reeds ourselves, sharpen them to a point with a little knife and tie a string to one end so we can wrap our fingers around it and make some leverage. We use these to press our marks into the clay. The most common shapes are the wedges for numbers and the different strokes for the words. We memorize the shapes of all the signs, and then we practice making them over and over and over again. It takes a lot of practice to make each stroke the exact same size and shape. And it takes a lot of concentration to keep your hands steady while you're doing it. Some people think being a scribe is an easy job. After all, we spend a lot of time sitting around doing nothing. But I tell you, it's not an easy job at all. It's a very quiet profession. Sometimes I work for hours without saying a word. In fact, I haven't said anything yet and I'm already getting a little hoarse. It's hard to talk when you're making all those marks. Your throat gets dry and your tongue gets thick. I have to take a drink of water every half hour or so. I know what you're thinking. Doesn't that get boring, making the same marks over and over again? Well, yes, it does get boring, but a good scribe doesn't make mistakes. A good scribe makes perfect marks every single time, and that takes a lot of concentration. If you think about anything else while you're working, you'll make a mistake. And if you make a mistake, you have to start the whole tablet over again. So, we learn to focus on the task at hand. We learn to find beauty in the perfect shape of a well-made mark. We learn to appreciate the feel of the clay against our fingers, the scratch of the reed against the clay, the snap of a dry tablet. It's not an easy job being a scribe, but someone's got to do it. Now I need some fresh air. Do you mind if I step out into the courtyard for a moment? It's so nice out here. The sun is warm on my face and the breeze is cool and refreshing. The flowers are in full bloom and the birds are singing. It's a beautiful day. Oh, and look, a butterfly. How lovely. I love watching them dance from flower to flower. It's so peaceful out here. I could stay forever. Hello. Is this thing on? Can you hear me? I'm in the courtyard. It's so beautiful out here. The sun is warm and the breeze is cool. The flowers are in bloom and the birds are singing. The heat grows. It is 11 a.m. now, but already the day feels heavy, the air thick and sluggish. By noon, it will be too much. Babylon at noon is a furnace of dust and stone. There is no shade here, not a tree to be seen. Only the great temples have some carved ornament to block the glare of the sun, but the sun still beats down on the mud brick walls, baking them until they radiate warmth like small ovens. The people move through the streets in a daze. Some go from shaded doorway to shaded doorway, seeking the slightest respite from the glare. Others seek the river, drinking when they can from jars carried by water boys who make regular trips from the river to the city. But the water is never quite enough. You drink deeply, greedily, and yet your throat is still dry, your tongue thick in your mouth, your lips dry, your skin prickles with salt from sweat that has nowhere to go. You are always, faintly, thirsty, but thirst is not your only worry. In this city of 250,000 people, there is always trouble brewing, always someone to complain to the authorities, always someone to take offense. Here in Babylon, the great King Hammurabi has his laws written in stone and spoken in the marketplaces. They are harsh, often merciless. A wrong word, a failed debt, a careless act, a spilled cup of beer can bring punishment out of proportion to the mistake. And neighbors whisper about disputes, always wary that someone might call upon the law. So, you keep your eyes open and your voice low. You know the law, or at least you try to. You've heard the judges in the royal court giving their rulings, heard the crowds murmuring their decisions. You've seen wrongdoers punished sometimes for crimes that seem beyond their control, a wife taken to the river to be drowned for being barren, a son put to death for striking his father, a servant girl beaten severely for a broken nose. Justice here is not lenient, it is exacting, as if carved into the bones of society. The streets, too, are alive with tension, filled with the calls of merchants selling dates, barley, wool, figs, cheese, oil. Here the river is wide and the water is deep. From boats come the sounds of hammers beating on iron, of saws cutting wood, of wheels turning. The smell of perfume mingles with the smell of sweat and urine and 1,000 other smells that make your nose wrinkle. In the distance, the hammers ring louder, the saws bite deeper, the wheels turn faster. What do they make there in the far workshops? Are they weapons for the king's army? Are they parts for the great wheeled vehicles that move like monsters through the streets? Or are they tools to till the fields where crops wither and die? You cannot know. Children run through the splashing of mud, their feet kicking up more dust. They scream with laughter, chasing one another toward the riverfront, toward the cool shade of a warehouse, or maybe just running because it is the hottest part of the day and the heat makes them wild. Behind this life are the sounds of hammers, the splash of children, the rumble of carts. There is an undercurrent of unease. People talk in hushed tones of floods that can sweep away homes and the river, take away all in sight. They speak of famines when the river fails and men grow thin and die. They whisper of diseases that kill children and leave families to wander the streets, beggars all. Life here is a balance between abundance and disaster. You know that behind the baked mud brick walls, people go hungry. You see the beggars with their hollow cheeks and outstretched hands. You hear the mothers pleading for scraps of food, for a crust of bread. You know, too, that the river, so close and yet so far, could turn against them all, could rise up and sweep the city away. You can feel the menace in the air, the threat of sudden darkness in the sky. When the rains come, when the river rises, when the clouds gather, you can feel the darkness coming, growing, gathering like a storm cloud over the horizon. Even in the evening, when the sun lowers and shadows stretch across the city, there is little rest. Neighbors talk loudly, families prepare food. The bleating of animals never truly ceases. Your hut is crowded, the air close and heavy, and the sounds of Babylon seep in through every crack in the walls. To us, accustomed to privacy, cool air, and silence, this world would feel relentless. The mud, the heat, the noise, the unyielding rules all combine into a life that never quite loosens its grip. And so as the night deepens, you realize the truth. You would not last a day in ancient Babylon without longing to escape back to your own time. Yet for the Babylonians themselves, this was simply life, the rhythm of survival, the comfort of knowing their place in the order of things, even if that order was strict and unforgiving. To them, it was not unbearable, it was the only world they knew. You've just entered the city of Babylon, one of the largest and wealthiest cities in the ancient world. All around you, people from the countryside come to pay their taxes and make their offerings to the gods. They're also here to trade their produce for Babylonian silver, which is stamped with the image of the king, Nebuchadnezzar II, who rules over all of Babylon and much of the surrounding area. These people have heard about Babylon's greatness, and they want to be part of it. As you walk along the wide streets, you see shops full of imported goods, men drinking in taverns, women gossiping as they draw water from a public fountain. In the distance, you hear the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. You see a scribe recording transactions on a clay tablet. You pass an elderly man being led by his son and think how fortunate he is to have such dutiful offspring. An old age was not necessarily a blessing in Babylon, and many elderly people were left to fend for themselves. At the center of the city, you see the famous hanging gardens, a series of lush terraces filled with all kinds of trees and plants. They are one of the ancient world's 7 wonders and a source of great pride for the Babylonians. But you're not here to marvel at the gardens or the city's other wonders. You are here because your master, King Nebuchadnezzar, has summoned you to his palace. As you approach the palace, you realize that you have never seen anything like it. The walls are decorated with intricate carvings and paintings. Soldiers in fine uniforms stand guard outside the entrance. You are ushered into a reception hall where nobles from all over the empire are gathered. There are merchants from distant lands, generals fresh from the battlefield, diplomats bearing gifts from neighboring kings. Everyone here seems to know exactly what to do and say you feel out of place. The king summons you before him and asks you a series of questions about your homeland. You answer as best you can, but you can tell that he already knows more about your country than you do. He is well informed about everything that happens in his empire, and he expects you to be, too. You learn that the king is planning to conquer even more land and he wants you to help him. But you are not the first person to try and conquer these lands. As the king speaks, you notice a map on the wall. It is covered with names in a language you do not understand. These are the names of the many nations that have tried and failed to subdue this proud people. The king tells you that he wants to change all of that. He wants to be remembered as the greatest king who ever lived. And he believes that you can help him achieve his goal. He gives you a small box and tells you to open it when you return home. Then he dismisses you and you make your way back to your lodgings. You think about the king's words and the message he has given you. You realize that you are now a part of something much larger than yourself. You are now a part of the rhythm of survival in ancient Babylon. Now, we don't actually have any records from ancient Babylon about what daily life was really like there. So a lot of this is speculative, but if you want to speculate along with me, then let me know in the comments below. What would you add to this story? What kind of day do you imagine someone living in ancient Babylon might have had? And what do you think that box that the king gave to the main character contained? Let me know in the comments below. He is the one we are here to meet today, not just as an abstraction on a steelyard beam, but as a man. You might think, given his enduring fame, that there would be little left to uncover, but you would be wrong. Even for a king who took pride in leaving no stone unturned in his quest for order, there are things hidden away, stories buried under centuries of dust. The first thing you notice about him is the weight of his gaze. He sits on his throne like a judge about to deliver a verdict, his eyes boring into yours, daring you to look away. It's hard to know what to make of this face. So severe, so unrelenting. Is this a mask of authority or a glimpse into the man's soul? He looks as though he carries the burden of the entire kingdom on his shoulders, and perhaps he does. He came to the throne at 21, not much older than many of his subjects when they reached the end of their lives. He inherited a Rome on the edge of chaos, where rival palaces schemed and plots simmered. To put down these rebellions, he had to fight, to win, to show no mercy. Was this a role he relished, or one that was thrust upon him? There is nothing in his posture, in the set of his jaw, to give us a clue. The steelyard is his most lasting monument, but also the source of our greatest uncertainty. For every definitive statement it makes about justice, about the value of life and property, there is a more ambiguous truth hiding in the shadows. Behind each law, there is a story that will never be known. Who were the victims and who were the victors? How do these laws affect the ebb and flow of daily life? Did they bring more order, or only to those who were already powerful? We can see this ambiguity in one of the most famous laws, an eye for an eye. It seems so brutal now, so alien to our ideas of fairness and due process, but in the context of the time, it may have been a step towards civilization. It established a limit, a boundary beyond which retaliation could not go. It defined the value of human life in monetary terms, setting a price on the head of a kidnapped woman. It may sound shocking to us, but in a world where women were often treated as chattel, this was an attempt to give them a measure of protection. So, we find ourselves caught between two images of Hammurabi, the one the history books have crafted for us, and the more complicated man we glimpse in these ancient artifacts. He is both the enforcer of laws that seem barbaric by our standards and a progressive lawmaker who attempted to address the injustices of his time. As you stand here, surrounded by the silent stones of Babylon, you realize that Hammurabi is not the exception, he is the rule. Every great ruler, every lawmaker, every person who has ever tried to impose order on the world is also a product of chaos. They are all grappling with the same questions of life and death, justice and mercy, power and responsibility. You leave the museum and walk back into the bustling city. The traffic zooms past you, the crowds press close, jostling for space, and you find yourself shrinking in the face of this overwhelming present. But then you stop. You close your eyes and picture the king on his throne, stern, unyielding, forever young. And in that image, you find a connection to something timeless, to someone who understood the weight of the world and still tried to make it a better place. Now, take a moment to explore more of Babylon's mysteries. What secrets do the ruins of the Hanging Garden still hold? How did the goddess Ishtar influence Hammurabi's life and legacy? And what surprises await you in the unexplored parts of the city? Your journey through time is far from over. In the year 1792 BCE, something remarkable happened. A Babylonian soldier named Hammurabi defeated the ruler of Mari in battle and took him back to Babylon as a prisoner. Mari was one of the many small kingdoms scattered across the region known as Mesopotamia, and Hammurabi's victory made him the most powerful king in the area. But Hammurabi was not done. He went on to conquer all of Mesopotamia, from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. His empire, at its peak, stretched over 400 miles. And when he died in 1750 BCE, he left behind a legacy that would influence the course of human history. Today, we remember Hammurabi for his code of laws, which was one of the first comprehensive sets of rules that applied equally to everyone in society, regardless of their status. But Hammurabi didn't write down these laws until after he had conquered all of Mesopotamia. So what was the secret to his success? What made him so powerful that he could defeat 28 kings and unite an entire region under one banner? To answer that question, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to imagine a young man named Hammurabi who had just become the king of Babylon. Now, you might be wondering why we're reimagining things, because we actually have a lot of information about Hammurabi's life. But in this case, the details don't really matter. What's important is what Hammurabi's situation was like. And for that, we can use our imaginations and the historical records to fill in the gaps. Hammurabi rose to power in the early 18th century BCE. Babylon, at the time, was not yet the famous empire of later centuries, but a modest kingdom among many. The land of Mesopotamia was a patchwork of city-states, each with its own ruler, its own gods, and its own ambitions. The challenge was not merely to survive, but to dominate without being destroyed in turn. Imagine Hammurabi in his early reign, a cautious leader, weighing alliances, writing letters on clay tablets to neighboring kings, negotiating for peace when possible, preparing for war when necessary. One wrong move could invite a coalition of rival kings to march on Babylon, so Hammurabi had to be careful. He needed to be ready for anything. He had to be strong. The kings of Mesopotamia were bound together in a constant dance of rivalry and cooperation. Treaties were signed with grand promises, but they were as fragile as the clay tablets they were written on. The land itself made this instability worse. The rivers flooded, crops failed, diseases spread, moments of weakness that invited invasion. To be a king in Babylon was to live in constant readiness. And then something remarkable happened. The ruler of Mari got cocky. He broke the treaty with Babylon and marched his army across the Euphrates River into Babylonian territory. This was a golden opportunity for a young, ambitious king to make his mark on history. If Hammurabi could defeat the army of Mari, he would become the most powerful king in Mesopotamia. Now, you might be wondering why I'm telling you all of this. After all, you probably didn't even know anything about Mari or the other kingdoms of ancient Mesopotamia. But the reason I am telling you this is that I want you to understand what it was like to be a king in ancient Babylon. It wasn't easy. There were constant threats from neighboring kingdoms. There was no such thing as a standing army. Soldiers had to be called up and trained when necessary. And there was always the risk of rebellion from within. Despite all of these challenges, Hammurabi managed to create one of the first great empires in history. He did it by being prepared, by having a strong military, and by being willing to take risks. But it wasn't just about military strength. Hammurabi also understood the importance of law and order. He knew that in order to create a stable and prosperous empire, he needed to establish a system of laws that everyone would follow. That's why he created the Code of Hammurabi, one of the first comprehensive sets of laws in history. The Code of Hammurabi covered everything from property rights to family law to criminal procedure. It established a legal framework that everyone had to abide by, regardless of their status. And it made Hammurabi even more powerful than he had ever imagined. So, the next time you hear the name Hammurabi, remember that he was more than just a ruthless conqueror. He was a brilliant strategist, a shrewd diplomat, and a visionary leader. He was the king who took a small kingdom and turned it into an empire. He was the king who created a legal system that would influence the course of human history. He was Hammurabi, the greatest king of Babylon. Hey there, welcome to this channel, where we bring history to life. Today, we are off to ancient Mesopotamia to meet one of history's most famous kings, King Hammurabi of Babylon. He ruled from 1923 to 1806 BC, a contemporary of Pharaoh Akhenaten and a few hundred years senior to King David. He has gone down in history as one of the greatest legislators of the ancient world. So, let's take a closer look at who he was and why he matters to us today. Hammurabi ascended to the throne at the age of about 27 after defeating the previous ruler of Babylon, his brother Samsi-Addu. Soon he extended Babylonian control beyond the city walls, incorporating much of southern Mesopotamia into his growing empire. As his power grew, so did his ambition. He wanted to be remembered as more than a conqueror, but as a bringer of order. He envisioned Babylon as the center of a great kingdom that would stretch from the mountains of the north to the Persian Gulf in the south. This vision required more than military strength. It needed unity, stability, and productivity. What better way to achieve these goals than through law? And so Hammurabi set about creating a legal code that would stand out as one of the most comprehensive and influential of the ancient world. So let's get started with the basics. Where do we find evidence for this great legal code? Well, like many ancient documents, It wasn't found in the possession of pharaohs or kings, but was discovered by a French archaeological team in the ruins of a city called Susa in present-day Iran. While excavating a palace built by the Achaemenid Empire around 5 centuries before Christ, they stumbled upon a black stone stele inscribed with rows and rows of ancient cuneiform script. After deciphering the script, scholars realized they were looking at the record of 280 laws established by Hammurabi. What became known as the Code of Hammurabi, this discovery in 1901 shocked the academic world and captivated the public imagination. Not only had they found an impressive collection of laws, but the stele was decorated with an image of Hammurabi receiving the law from the sun god Shamash. This reinforced the idea that these laws were not just the product of a human mind, but a divine mandate, making them out and unchangeable. Let's delve into some of the code's provisions, keeping in mind that they were shaped by the context of their time. Under Hammurabi's rule, the main objective of the law was to maintain social order and protect the interests of the wealthy landowners. This is reflected in the severe punishments for crimes like stealing, which varied based on the value of the stolen goods. For instance, stealing a field or garden was met with the punishment of death. Stealing a donkey or sheep carried a fine of 3 times the animal's value. Stealing a slave resulted in exile from a kingdom. These laws show a society deeply concerned with protecting property rights. In fact, debt was such a concern that a series of laws addressed the issue of slavery resulting from debt. If a freeborn Babylonian pledged himself as collateral for a loan and a creditor decided to exact the pledge, he could do so, but only for a maximum of 3 years. After that, the pledge had to be returned. However, if a Babylonian sold himself to a foreign country due to debt and the king granted permission for him to return, the former debtor would remain a slave to his family for 6 years. Interestingly, the law provided for the liberation of female slaves on marriage. It wasn't just economic crimes that carried harsh punishments. Crimes against women also received severe penalties. For example, a man could put his wife up for sale if she committed adultery, but only after providing her with a divorce. If a woman who was not married accused an unmarried man of impregnating her, the man could be forced to marry her. If a woman falsely accused an innocent man of impregnating her, she and her lover could face death by drowning. Laws also addressed domestic issues. If a son struck his father, he was to receive 30 lashes. However, the father could reduce the punishment to a fine if he chose not to press charges. Likewise, a daughter's punishment for striking her mother was left to the discretion of the father. Hammurabi's code even extended to business contracts, setting out guidelines for wages, sales contracts, and leases. It also regulated the behavior of witnesses in court proceedings and outlined the rights and duties of both landlords and tenants. A fascinating aspect of the code is the concept of an eye for an eye, which is exemplified in a law that states if a man blinded one man in the right or left eye, they would gouge out his eye. However, it is essential to note that the concept of an eye for an eye is often misunderstood as condoning vengeance. Instead, it's best understood as a way to ensure compensation for damages. For instance, if a baker sold a customer bread made with plaster instead of flour, the customer could demand the removal of the baker's hand. In this case, the punishment was not meant to inflict suffering, but to render the perpetrator unable to commit the same crime again. While the Code of Hammurabi might seem brutal by today's standards, it was actually quite progressive for its time. It provided a systematic and comprehensive approach to resolving disputes, offering a structured path to justice. Before Hammurabi, laws were often unwritten and applied arbitrarily. Hammurabi changed this by putting laws into writing, ensuring that everyone could see them and understand their implications. This move towards transparency was a giant leap for the region, establishing Babylon as a center of justice. In addition to its progressive legal approach, the Code of Hammurabi also stands out because of its sheer volume. At 282 laws, it was one of the most extensive collections of laws ever assembled at that point in history. Its comprehensiveness allowed it to cover a wide range of situations, establishing a clear set of rules for everyday life in Babylon. However, no discussion of Hammurabi's legacy would be complete without acknowledging its limitations. Despite its progressive nature, the code was not without its blind spots. For instance, it did little to protect the rights of women and slaves, reflecting the societal norms of the time. Women were largely seen as property, and their rights were limited to what the male head of the household deemed fit. Similarly, slaves had no legal rights and could be bought, sold, or inherited like any other piece of property. Despite its shortcomings, the Code of Hammurabi remains a cornerstone of legal history. Its influence can be seen in subsequent legal codes, including the laws of the Medes and Persians and the Hebrew law of Deuteronomy. Its emphasis on written law and systematic justice paved the way for future legal developments, helping to shape the course of legal history. So, why should you care about Hammurabi today? Because he left behind more than just a pile of ancient clay tablets. He established one of the earliest legal systems that we know of, a system that laid the groundwork for how laws should be created, written, and applied. His systematic approach to justice influenced civilizations for centuries to come. Today, as we sit in courtrooms and debate legal precedents, we are continuing a tradition that Hammurabi helped establish thousands of years ago. Thanks for joining us as we explored the world of Hammurabi. Don't forget to subscribe for more history. And remember, if you enjoyed this video, it's always appreciated. Now let's go back to the Middle East. Hammurabi was not only a lawgiver, he was a conqueror. For decades, he maneuvered carefully among rival kings, forging temporary alliances. But, as his power grew, he began to expand Babylon's reach. One by one, neighboring city-states fell under his control. Larsa, Mari, Ishnun all absorbed into a growing Babylonian kingdom. His victories were not merely military, they were administrative. He reorganized taxation, built canals to improve agriculture, and tightened the web of bureaucracy that stretched across the land. Just as Rome would do centuries later, Hammurabi took ideas from the people he conquered. From Larsa, he adopted their system of weights and measures. From Mari, he picked up their agricultural techniques. This wasn't mere plunder or pillage, it was calculated annexation. Each city brought into the Babylonian fold contributed to its strength. His ambition, however, was not matched by his ability. And so while he dreamed of a fully realized Babylonian empire, his successors achieved it. But before we get to them, let's spend a bit more time bringing the past alive. Imagine the Euphrates lined with canals dug at Hammurabi's command, their waters redirected to fields of barley and wheat. Farmers worked these fields under the heat of the same sun that pressed down upon the scribes in their schools. All of this effort, the laws, the canals, the expansion fed into the dream of a unified Babylon, a city whose authority stretched across Mesopotamia. For a time, it seemed to work. Hammurabi ruled for more than 4 decades, an impressive span in a world where rulers often fell quickly. His reign brought Babylon to prominence, turning a modest kingdom into a formidable power. But empires, even those born in the ancient past, are fragile things. They live and die on the edge of a ruler's whim, the caprice of a king, the health of an emperor. Hammurabi was no exception. In the 26th year of his rule, he died. The steely-eyed monarch, who had carved out an empire from the unruly states of Mesopotamia, breathed his last, leaving Babylon at a crossroads. Would it hold? Could it endure beyond its founder? It helps to understand the context. Imagine walking through the bustling streets of Babylon, the air thick with the scent of date palms and myrrh. You hear the chatter of merchants, the call to prayer from a distant tower. The city is a melting pot of cultures, a tapestry woven with threads from across Mesopotamia. But beneath this vibrant surface, there are undercurrents. There are rivalries, tension simmering just below the waves. This was the world Hammurabi left behind, a kingdom on the brink of change. Upon his death, the crown passed to his son, Samsi-Addu. A new era dawned for Babylon. Under Samshu, the state religion centered around the god Marduk took root, laying the foundation for Babylon's rise to become the dominant power in Mesopotamia. Yet despite this religious unity, political rivalries persisted. A generation later, after Samsu's death, another king ascended the throne, but he didn't rule alone. His brother, Abdi-Heka, shared power. Together, they steered Babylon through turbulent times, warding off threats from Assyria in the north. These years were a crucible, forging a new kind of Babylonian identity. In the face of external pressures, the brothers forged ahead, pushing Babylon toward greater centralization. However, by the end of their reigns, cracks appeared. As we move into the 17th century BC, Babylon stood on the cusp of transformation. A new king, Hammurabi, Asarli-Tali, took the throne. His name echoes with the echoes of Babylon's past, but what would his story be? Under his leadership, Babylon would face its greatest challenge yet. To truly appreciate this pivotal moment in Babylonian history, imagine yourself in ancient Babylon. The mighty Euphrates winds through the city, a lifeline amidst the bustling commerce. Towering temples adorned with glazed bricks pierce the sky. Scribes meticulously etch clay tablets while merchants hawk their wares in the shadow of Ishtar's gate. This is Babylon at its zenith, but it's also a city on edge. For the once formidable Akkadian Empire, which had swept through Mesopotamia like a desert storm, has crumbled, leaving behind a power vacuum. Babylon finds itself in the eye of this vacuum, poised to either rise or fall. Amidst this uncertainty, King Hammurabi, Asarli-Tali, steps onto the throne. His name, a testament to his lineage, now carries the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. Now, envision the vast plains of Mesopotamia stretching under a relentless sun. Here, nomadic tribes roamed, their ways tied to the rhythms of the seasons, their allegiances fluid as water. Now, as the Akkadian Empire crumbles, these tribes stir. Sensing weakness, they had Babylon's fertile lands, ready to pounce. As the full force of Babylon's predicament becomes clear, King Hammurabi realizes that survival hinges on unity. The threat from the nomads in the east is existential. To counter this, he reaches out to the Hittites in the north and Kassite tribes in the west, forging alliances. He seeks to bind these disparate groups not through conquest, but through marriage. Through strategic unions, he weaves a web of kinship, hoping to transform rivals into allies. Yet even as he forges these alliances, shadows loom. Within Babylon's walls, discontent brews. The old nobility chafes under the king's reforms, their privileges curtailed, their influence waned. The once proud elites now find themselves stripped of power, cast into the shadows of Babylon's grand design. Amidst this internal strife, the king's enemies seek their moment. In a fateful confrontation in the 4th year of his reign, the king faces a mutiny from his own brother, whom he had designated heir. This betrayal tears at the fabric of the kingdom, threatening to unravel all of Hammurabi's hard-won gains. As the dust settles from this internal conflict, the king emerges victorious, but the scars run deep. The seeds of doubt have been sown, whispering that the Kassites, with their distinct language and customs, may not be truly loyal. In the aftermath of these tumultuous events, the king turns his gaze to the east, where the nomadic tribes wait. With his forces bolstered by Hittite allies, he confronts the eastern threat. Battles rage across the plains of Mesopotamia, a clash between tradition and change. The king's reforms, once derided, are now vindicated. His Kassites stand firm, their loyalty proven on the field of battle. By the end of the 13th year of his reign, victory is secured, but at what cost? The war has exacted a heavy toll. The land lies in ruins, the treasury is depleted, and the once mighty Babylon is left wounded. Despite the scars, the king presses on. He sets about the task of healing his kingdom, issuing edicts to rebuild, restore, and renew. Yet even as he strives to heal the wounds of war, whispers persist. Some, both inside and outside Babylon, question the wisdom of trusting the Kassites. They argue that the alliance with the Hittites, though successful, has set a dangerous precedent, opening the gates of Babylon to foreign influence. Now, envision the halls of Babylon's grand temples, where priests clad in white linen debate the merits of the Kassite presence. Their voices echo with the weight of tradition as they ponder whether these outsiders, with their unfamiliar gods and customs, have overstayed their welcome. In the face of these doubts, the king stands resolute. He pushes forward with integrating the Kassites, weaving their culture into the fabric of Babylonian society. His vision is clear, a stronger, more inclusive Babylon, but as the years pass, cracks appear. By the 25th year of his reign, the seams of this new Babylon begin to fray. The very alliances that secured the kingdom are now strained. The Hittite presence, once celebrated, is viewed with suspicion, and the Kassites, far from being integrated, remain an insular community, their loyalty questioned, their motives misinterpreted. And then comes the breaking point. In the 27th year of his reign, the Hittites rebel. The alliance, once a bulwark of strength, has crumbled, leaving Babylon exposed. The king finds himself at a crossroads, his kingdom teetering on the edge of collapse. The final blow comes when his brother, once his ally, now his betrayer, dies. Without the support of his family, the king's position becomes untenable. Internal strife and external threats converge, culminating in a palace coup. Now, picture the heart of Babylon, the royal court, a place where power is currency and loyalty is fleeting. In this treacherous landscape, the king is deposed, marking the end of a dynasty. The very foundations of Babylonian society are shaken. The country descended into chaos and civil war. It was during this turmoil that the Kassite king, Gondu, took the throne, ushering in a new era for Babylon. His dynasty would leave an indelible mark on Babylonian history. For several centuries, Babylon stumbled, losing much of its former glory. Yet like a tenacious weed, it pushed through, adapting, evolving. The Kassites, once outsiders, became the ruling class. Over time, they shed their nomadic past, embracing the ways of the city. Their language, once a marker of difference, evolved to mirror the Babylonian tongue. And so the cycle continued, a new people finding their place in the heart of an ancient city. What can we learn from the rise and fall of the Babylonian Empire? Let's break it down. Hammurabi's Code. We can talk about Hammurabi's Code. It laid the foundation for future legal systems. Its systematic approach to law, while harsh by today's standards, was revolutionary. It brought a level of order and consistency to the administration of justice. Expansionism and administration. Think about how Babylon expanded, absorbing neighboring city-states and their cultures. This mirrors the way many empires have grown, taking on new territories and influences. But it also brings up a crucial lesson about administration. No matter how big your empire gets, you need a good system to keep it together. Babylon's success shows how important things like tax collection, infrastructure, and communication are. Religion and politics. When we think about how closely religion and politics were intertwined in ancient Babylon, it makes us think about how different parts of society, like religious leaders and politicians, work together and sometimes fight each other. Remember how Hammurabi made Babylon's patron god Marduk really important. Well, this kind of religious favoritism ain't unique to ancient times. The fragility of empires. Even strong empires like Babylon aren't always as stable as they seem. Things like economic problems, fights for power, and changes in leadership can make even the biggest empires crumble. The story of Hammurabi reminds us that even if an empire lasts a long time, it doesn't mean it won't face challenges. Adaptation and change. The most interesting thing about Babylon is how it changed over time. How the Kassites, who were seen as outsiders, eventually became the rulers of Babylon. This teaches us how societies adapt and change, especially when different cultures come together. The story of the Kassites tells us that even people who seem very different can come together and build something new. Babylon's story is not just about ancient Mesopotamia. It's about how societies grow, change, and face challenges. As you study history, remember that every story has something to teach us about ourselves and the world we live in today. I know that history is full of brilliant, cunning, ruthless individuals who carve out vast empires for themselves. But I also think it's important to remember that history is also full of equally brilliant, cunning, ruthless individuals who come along afterwards and dismantle those empires, because as much as we like to think otherwise, the brilliance, cunning and ruthlessness of one individual can only carry a state so far. You can't build an entire empire on sand, no matter how tall you stack those grains. Eventually, the wind comes and blows it all away. And yet, as with so many stories in history, what rose under Hammurabi faltered after his death. His sons and successors inherited a kingdom too large, too unstable, too fragile. Without his personal authority, cracks appeared. Rivals tested Babylon's strength. The empire began to contract just as swiftly as it had expanded. It is a familiar pattern, repeated across centuries and empires. The brilliance of one ruler, followed by the slow erosion of their achievements. Now, while the Neo-Babylonian Empire would last another century, they never again posed a threat to the Egyptians. In fact, they didn't even really control Mesopotamia outside of the region around Babylon itself. Now, there are two lessons we can take from this. First, even the greatest conquerors eventually die and their empires fall apart. And second, when assessing the impact of an ancient ruler, it can be useful to consider both the totality of their achievements and how and why they were able to accomplish them. Hammurabi was born into a relatively minor Mesopotamian state. By his own reckoning, he defeated 28 kings during his lifetime and brought all of Mesopotamia under the rule of Babylon. He also, according to his own self-aggrandizing inscriptions, reformed Babylon's legal system, reorganized its administration, and built great public works projects. He sounds like a benevolent tyrant, a phrase that usually describes a leader whose policies sound tyrannical but are actually quite progressive for their time and place. He is most famous today for his law code, which has survived on a 7-foot-tall, 175-pound black stone stele, the kind of thing you can't miss, even if you weren't looking for it. That's because Hammurabi wanted everyone to know about his accomplishments. He ruled according to the principle of might is right and used superior Babylonian military force to subjugate rival states and smash their cities. While he is often remembered as a great legislator, bringing law and order to Mesopotamia, a closer reading of his deeds reveals a more typical story of imperial overreach. He smashed city-states, smashed their infrastructure, and imposed harsh punishments on those he conquered. Many of the laws bearing his name merely codified and formalized existing customs and legal practices, especially concerning property rights, family law, and business contracts. At the same time, the code is also full of the kinds of laws that any society at the time would likely have needed. Laws against theft, assault, fraud, basically anything that would disrupt the social order and allow chaos to reign. In other words, Hammurabi was neither the first nor the last ruler to bring about a golden age of peace and prosperity for his people. He was a soldier king who carved out a vast but ultimately short-lived empire. His empire fell apart because it was built on force alone, without any kind of unifying identity or ideology. When he died, the empire felt no compulsion to continue to exist. So, what do we remember him for? Well, mostly for his law code, which is interesting, but not necessarily in the way you might expect. Ancient Near Eastern history is full of law codes. There was the code of Ur-Nammu from the Sumerians, the code of Lipitishtar from the Akkadians, and the Hittites had a code too. The big difference between those and Hammurabi's is that he put his laws on a stele and paraded them around for everyone to see. In doing so, he created a narrative about himself as the champion of justice and order, a divine king who subdued the unruly states of Mesopotamia and brought peace to the region. In many ways, Hammurabi was the world's first great man of the people, a charismatic leader who came to represent the aspirations of ordinary people everywhere for a better world free from injustice and oppression. But like all such leaders, his achievements outlasted his ability to maintain them. His empire fragmented and fell into petty squabbles just as soon as he was dead. But his deeds lived on in the stories that people told about him. And those stories, like the steely-eyed gaze of the man on the stele, endure to this day. When you're having fun, history is fun. We have a ton of shows out right now, including the epic tale of Gilgamesh, the world's first great poem, and the origins, where Dan Jones untangles the myths from the history to find out what really happened in the first 12,000 years of human civilization. Plus, we've got a bunch of documentaries airing on Thanksgiving week, including Engineering the Ancient World and Engineering the Renaissance, as well as specials about the real-life historical figures who inspired Hamilton. As you imagine the end of Hammurabi's reign, picture again the stele with his laws, standing tall in a courtyard. Dust settles on its surface, the lines of cuneiform still sharp under the sun. People pass by it, glancing at the words, reminded of the order they live under. Even as kings rise and fall, the laws remain. In the quiet of your room, centuries away from that world, it is worth pausing to reflect. For the Babylonians, justice was not gentle. It was exact, measured, unyielding, yet in its harshness, they found stability. And in Hammurabi's name, they found a story that would echo long after the mud brick walls of their city crumbled into dust. Hammurabi's code was one of the first sets of written laws. It covered everything from property rights to family law to criminal law. But it was also very brutal. The code was based on the idea of an eye for an eye. So, if someone did something bad, they would be punished in the same way. That means that if you committed a crime, you could be put to death. One of the most famous examples of this is in the story of a woman who was accused of witchcraft. She was tortured, and when she confessed, she was thrown into a river with stones tied around her ankles. Another example is the story of a man who was accused of stealing a pig. He was put on trial, and when he was found guilty, he was put to death. Now, we may think that this is barbaric, but for the Babylonians, this was justice. They believed that if you broke the law, you deserved to die. And Hammurabi's code made sure that that happened. The reason why Hammurabi's code was so brutal is because the Babylonians lived in a very dangerous world. They were constantly at war with other kingdoms, and there were no police to protect them. If you weren't careful, you could be robbed or killed. So the Babylonians needed a system of laws that was strong enough to keep them safe. They also believed that everyone was equal under the law. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, male or female. Everyone was subject to Hammurabi's code. This was very progressive for the time period, but it also meant that people could use the law to get revenge on each other. Under Hammurabi's rule, there was no such thing as a fair trial. If you were accused of a crime, you were guilty. The only question was what punishment you deserved. There was no room for appeals or habeas corpus. If you were accused of a crime, you could be put to death without ever having a chance to defend yourself. The stories of the woman who was accused of witchcraft and the man who was accused of stealing the pig, not isolated cases. There were thousands of people who were put to death under Hammurabi's rule. He was known as a ruthless dictator who ruled with an iron fist, but the people of Babylon loved him for it. They felt safe under his rule, and they knew that he would protect them from harm. When he died, he was succeeded by his son, but his son was not like him. He was weak and ineffective, and the people of Babylon hated him. They wanted Hammurabi back, but Hammurabi could not come back. He had been dead for 1800 years. His empire had fallen apart and his laws had been forgotten. But the people of Babylon didn't know that. To them, Hammurabi was a god who had abandoned them. They didn't know that he had died or that his empire had fallen apart. They just knew that they were in trouble and they needed his help. So they turned to the next best thing. They turned to his laws. They looked to Hammurabi's code for guidance, and they tried to follow it as closely as they could. And that's how Hammurabi's laws survived for so long. It wasn't because they were perfect or fair or even humane. It was because the people of Babylon loved their king, and they wanted to do what he would have wanted them to do. If you enjoyed this episode, stay tuned for more. What do you think when you hear the name Babylon? A sprawling city, perhaps, or maybe an ancient empire. Perhaps you recall a verse from the book of Revelation. If you're a fan of the video game series Assassin's Creed, the name might bring up images of a vast metropolis nestled between four rivers. But whatever your first impressions, chances are you won't picture a mountain, and yet mountains were some of the first things to catch the eye of explorers who stumbled upon the ruins of Babylon. For many centuries, all that visitors knew for certain was that they stood at the base of a colossal ziggurat, an ancient tower that had been reduced to a mound of rubble. The structure was so large that it seemed more like an artificial hill than a man-made construction. What was this monument, and how did it fit into the story of Babylon? To answer these questions, we must peer back through the mists of time. It was around 1800 BCE when the first ziggurat began to take shape. At its core was a raised platform, a flat area of land made from mud brick that measured roughly 90 meters square. This platform was then surrounded by a massive double-sided ramp, which was also made of mud brick. On the outer side of the ramp, there was a series of rooms, each one containing its own shrine. These shrines were likely used for rituals and storage purposes. Every few meters along the ramp, there was a staircase that allowed pilgrims to ascend to higher levels. As they climbed, they would pass through additional doorways until they reached the top of the ziggurat. From here, they would have had a panoramic view of the entire city. But why did the Babylonians build such a structure? Ziggurats were built all over Mesopotamia, but none were as grand as the ones that adorned the skyline of Babylon. Many scholars believe that they were built to honor Marduk, the patron deity of the city. Marduk was particularly associated with the sky, so the ziggurat served as a link between the heavens and earth. In addition, the ziggurat was a place where people could approach the divine. There were no idols or statues of Marduk within the structure, only empty space at the top where priests would stand and deliver their sermons. One of the most famous ziggurats was the Etemenenki. According to legend, it was 270 feet tall and had 7 stages. However, recent excavations suggest that it was only 3 stories high. Regardless of its exact dimensions, it remained a prominent feature of Babylon for nearly 2,000 years. The second wonder we'll discuss today is shrouded in even more mystery, namely because it may not have ever existed. I am, of course, referring to the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Like the Colossus of Rhodes and the Lighthouse of Alexandria, the Hanging Gardens were destroyed long ago. Unlike those structures, however, no one is sure if they ever really existed. According to some accounts, the Hanging Gardens were a lavish display of greenery suspended from a series of arches. They were located within the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II, who came to power in 605 BCE. The story goes that he built the gardens as a gift for his wife, Amadis, who longed for the lush hills of her homeland. Over time, the gardens fell into disrepair and were eventually destroyed. However, there is little evidence to support this story. In fact, there are no contemporary accounts of the Hanging Gardens. All of our information comes from writers who lived centuries after the alleged destruction of Babylon. One of the earliest descriptions comes from the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, who claimed that the gardens were an ingenious feat of engineering, suspended from floor to ceiling arches. Other writers repeated and expanded upon his account, eventually concocting tales of water being pumped from the Euphrates River to irrigate the gardens. But is there any truth to these descriptions? Some scholars believe that the Hanging Gardens were nothing more than a misinterpretation of the Ishtar Gate, one of the 8 ancient world wonders. Like the ziggurat, the gate was covered with lush imagery, including depictions of lions and dragons. Perhaps this imagery gave ancient writers the impression that they were witnessing the Hanging Gardens firsthand. Or perhaps the gardens did exist, though not in the way that they have been traditionally depicted. There is archaeological evidence of a large park-like area within the city of Babylon, complete with canals and paved walkways. This park was likely used for recreation and may have been embellished by later writers. Ultimately, the truth may never be known. What do you think? Did the Hanging Gardens exist, or were they merely a figment of the ancient writers' imaginations? And what other mysteries do you think lie hidden beneath the sands of Babylon? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out our other videos about ancient civilizations. Thanks for watching. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the city. Before you, rising higher than any other structure, is the Great Ziggurat. Hello and welcome to this channel. Today we are going to explore ancient Mesopotamia. Now, before we get into our main topic, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, let's begin. You are standing at the edge of the city. Before you, rising higher than any other structure, is the Great Ziggurat. The word ziggurat comes to us from the Akkadian word for mountain. They were not temples in the way you might imagine from later civilizations, but massive stepped platforms, built from mud brick and coated with fired brick to withstand the weather. Platforms were connected by staircases or ramps allowing people to ascend to their summits. Though the ramps were often destroyed, the platforms themselves usually stood the test of time and could serve their city for many generations. The most famous ziggurat of Babylon was called Etemenenki, a name that means house of the foundation of heaven and earth. It was dedicated to the god Marduk, Babylon's patron deity. The ziggurat was not merely an architectural achievement. It was a statement, a link between earth and heaven, man and divine. This is because according to Babylonian mythology, the gods had descended to earth in the form of human-like beings. To live in Babylon was to live in the shadow of this colossal stairway to the gods. To really appreciate the ziggurat, though, you have to see it from the ground. You slowly begin your journey up the stairs, ascending step by step, each level slightly smaller than the one below, until at last you reach the summit. There a shrine was said to house the god's presence. From this height, the whole city lay at your feet. The streets, the canals, the palace, the river winding steadily on. But while the ziggurat was impressive from afar, it wasn't the only reason to visit. In fact, the majority of the population lived not in the sprawling suburbs, but within the city walls. In the center, you would find a palace complex where the king held court. Here, nobles, merchants, and scribes would come to conduct business. The king's court was a hive of activity. Officials recorded the arrival and departure of diplomats, managed the distribution of grain rations, and received petitions from those seeking royal assistance. In the distance, you can hear the rhythmic clang of hammers on metal, the sounds of artisans working in the royal armories, crafting weapons and tools. Nearby, a group of soldiers practiced with their bows and arrows, their movements precise and efficient. Their commander, a veteran of many battles, watched intently, offering advice and encouragement. He knew that the strength of Babylon lay not only in its mighty ziggurat, but also in its well-trained army. As you continue your walk, you pass through the city's bustling marketplace, a vibrant hub of commerce where merchants from across the known world came to trade their wares. Here you can find anything from spices and textiles to precious metals and gemstones. You take a moment to browse the colorful displays of pottery, intricately designed glassware, and perfumes. The air is filled with the aroma of fresh bread, roasted meat, and sweet dates. Leaving the market behind, you enter the sacred precinct of Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. Here, priests and priestesses performed rituals in her honor, and worshippers came to pay their respects. As you approach the temple, you notice the intricate carvings on its walls, depicting scenes from ancient myths and legends. Inside, the air is thick with incense and the sound of chanting. You watch in awe as the priests and priestesses dance and twirl, their movements graceful and fluid. After the temple, you head to the royal library, one of the ancient world's first and greatest repositories of knowledge. Here, Rows upon rows of clay tablets containing everything from historical records to literary works and scientific treatises lined the shelves. The library was not just a place for scholars, but also a center of intellectual and cultural life, where people from all walks of life came to learn and share their knowledge. You wander through the stacks, marveling at the vast amount of knowledge contained within these fragile tablets, and you realize that you are standing in the cradle of civilization itself. But Babylon was not just about religion, trade, and learning. It was also a city of innovation and invention. In the royal gardens, you discover new plants and flowers from distant lands and marvel at the ingenious irrigation system that brought water from the nearby Euphrates River to keep them watered. You also witness groundbreaking experiments in astronomy as the Babylonians made detailed observations of the stars and planets and developed sophisticated instruments to track their movements. You watch and wonder as they use their skills to predict eclipses and other celestial events with astonishing accuracy. However, not everyone in Babylon was so fortunate. As you walk through the city, you notice a stark contrast between the opulence of the palace and the poverty of the surrounding slums. You see families living in dilapidated houses, children going hungry, and the sick and elderly begging for help. You learn that despite the city's wealth and prosperity, there was also widespread poverty and inequality. One day, you stumble upon a group of slaves working on a monumental construction project. You watch in fascination as they hauled massive stones and shaped them into towering walls, creating a massive fortress around the city. You learn that these slaves were prisoners of war or people who had been sold into servitude and that their labor was essential to Babylon's success. You feel a pang of sympathy for these unfortunate souls, knowing that their lives are brutal and demeaning. As you explore further, you uncover a darker side of Babylon. You hear tales of tyranny and oppression, as the powerful elite ruled over the city with an iron fist. You learn that dissent and disobedience were met with swift and brutal punishment, and that even the slightest criticism of the regime could lead to torture and exile. You shudder to think of the horrors that must be happening behind closed doors in the dreaded dungeons beneath the palace. And then there were the wars. You hear stories of the fierce battles fought against neighboring kingdoms, of the bloodshed and destruction, and of the countless lives that were lost. You learn that Babylon was a ruthless and expansionist empire, always seeking to acquire more land and power. You caught and help, but wonder if this thirst for conquest would eventually lead to the city's downfall. In the end, you come to realize that Babylon was not the utopian paradise it had seemed at first glance. Despite its grandeur and achievements, it was also a place of great suffering and injustice. But it was here, in this ancient Mesopotamian city, that the foundations of human civilization were laid, setting the stage for the rise of empires and shaping the course of history. So, what happened to it today? Very little remains of it. Over the centuries, time has eroded its bricks, floods have washed away its foundations. Some even believe that stories of the Ziggurat may have echoed into later traditions, perhaps influencing the biblical tale of the Tower of Babel. But whether myth or memory, its image lingers. A faded sketch in an ancient text, a half-remembered dream, a whisper on the wind. In 1899, a British archaeologist named Robert Koldewey began excavations at Babylon. Working under the scorching Mesopotamian sun, his team uncovered the remains of a massive tower. Could this be the legendary Tower of Babel? Or perhaps it was simply another great monument of this once magnificent city. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe for more. We will see you next time. You can tell a lot about a civilization by what it builds. Its architecture and engineering speak volumes about the society that created them. So let's take a journey back in time to ancient Mesopotamia, where one of the world's most extraordinary structures beckons us from the pages of history. Today, this wonder is lost to time. All we have are written accounts and artistic renderings. Yet even these scant records reveal much about the culture that built it. Allow me to introduce you to the enigmatic Ziggurat of Babylon. To understand the Ziggurat, we must first explore the cultural landscape from which it arose. Picture yourself in ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, amidst the scorching sun and unforgiving terrain, a city rose to prominence, Babylon. This wasn't just any settlement, it was a nexus of trade, a seat of learning, and a religious center. At its heart, a mighty king aspired to build something extraordinary, a monumental symbol of his city's prosperity and his own divine mandate. But why build a tower? What was the purpose of this architectural marvel? Let's delve into the historical context. In ancient Mesopotamia, religion permeated every aspect of life. Kings were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people. The ruler who commissioned the ziggurat likely viewed it as a way to physically connect with the heavens and draw closer to the gods. By ascending the tower, he would literally climb toward the divine, mirroring the ascent of his soul toward the celestial realms. The ziggurat wasn't merely an engineering feat. It was a religious statement, a testament to the king's piety and power. Now, let's turn to the structure itself. What did this imposing monument look like? Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of physical evidence left. Most of what we know comes from written records and artwork. However, these sources paint a vivid picture. The ziggurat was a massive step pyramid with a square base and sloping sides. Each side would have been about 90 feet high. That's the equivalent of an 8-story building. The tower had several levels connected by staircases, allowing worshippers to ascend to the top. The topmost platform was reserved for the temple and priests' residences. In fact, some sources indicate that there might have been rooms for up to 200 priests at the top. Imagine the panoramic view they would have had from their lofty homes. But the ziggurat wasn't just a monumental structure, it was also an engineering marvel. Building something this tall required innovative techniques to ensure its stability. Ancient Mesopotamian engineers developed mud brick for the ziggurat's construction. This material was made by mixing clay, water, and straw, and then letting it dry in the sun. Despite its seemingly simple composition, mud brick was surprisingly durable. It could withstand the harsh Mesopotamian weather and the test of time. The ziggurat, however, wouldn't be solely reliant on the strength of its bricks. Ancient builders understood the importance of balance and symmetry. By creating a symmetrical structure, they ensured that the weight would be evenly distributed, reducing the risk of collapse. Moreover, the design of the ziggurat would have taken advantage of the natural slope of the land. Building on higher ground would have minimized the impact of flooding, a common occurrence in the region to the overflowing of the Euphrates River. Let's now shift our focus to the interior of the ziggurat. Life at the top would have been both spiritual and practical. The upper levels were dedicated to religious purposes, housing temples and serving as a residence for priests. These individuals weren't just spiritual leaders. They were also administrators, scribes, and teachers. The priests would have played a crucial role in maintaining the ziggurat, ensuring it remained a place of worship and learning. As we descend to the lower levels, we encounter more mundane aspects of life in the ziggurat. The base would have housed administrative offices, storage facilities, and workshops. Given the ziggurat's prominent position in the city, it's likely that officials and craftsmen skilled in various trades would have been assigned to live there. The entire complex would have bustled with activity, a microcosm of life in ancient Babylon. But what about King Hammurabi? How did he fit into all of this? The great lawgiver of Babylon is often associated with the ziggurat, and for good reason. Hammurabi's stele, the black stone monument bearing his famous code of laws, was likely displayed prominently at the ziggurat. It would have served as a constant reminder of his legacy and a symbol of the city's justice and order. Finally, let's talk about maintenance. Keeping a structure this grand and this tall in good condition would have been a monumental task. However, it's important to remember that the ziggurat wasn't built in a day. It likely took decades to complete. This means that the builders had time to develop efficient methods for upkeep. A team of masons, carpenters, and laborers would have been responsible for repairs, ensuring that the ziggurat remained a source of pride for the city. In conclusion, the ziggurat of Babylon wasn't just a tall structure made of mud brick. It was a symbol of the Mesopotamians' understanding of the world around them. They harnessed engineering principles to create a stable structure and integrated religion into every aspect of its design. The ziggurat reminds us of the ingenuity of ancient civilizations and their desire to reach for the heavens. However, there's a twist to this tale. While we've explored the impressive feats of engineering and religious symbolism, we haven't actually confirmed that the ziggurat ever truly existed. Our knowledge of it comes from written accounts and artwork, not from archaeological findings. There's a chance that this magnificent structure, with its soaring heights and intricate details, exists only in the annals of history. As we reflect on the legacy of the ziggurat, we're left with more questions than answers. Did it stand proudly in the heart of Babylon, or is it a figment of the ancient scribes' imaginations? Can we ever hope to uncover its secrets, or will they remain buried beneath the sands of time? The enigma of the ziggurat challenges us to think critically about the sources we rely on and the nature of historical discovery. It also reminds us of the boundless creativity of the human mind. Whether or not the ziggurat of Babylon ever existed, it captures our imagination and inspires us to reach for the heavens. And speaking of reaching for the heavens, if you've enjoyed this journey back in time, don't forget to stay tuned. We've got many more videos lined up that will transport you to different eras and explore fascinating historical mysteries. Click the link on screen now to continue your journey through time. When we think of ancient civilizations, we often picture great monuments and bustling cities, testaments to human ingenuity and achievement. But history tells a different story, one filled with absences, with sites whose remains hint at past glories while leaving much to the imagination. Among these enigmatic places, to stand out, the Ziggurat of Babylon and the Hanging Gardens. Their lore lies not in what can be proven, but in what can only be imagined, inviting us to ponder the nature of truth, memory, and the human experience. Let's start our journey in the heart of present-day Iraq, where the ruins of Babylon still hold secrets from centuries past. Imagine standing before the remnants of a massive step tower, its surface marred by the passage of time, its height reduced to a shadow of its former self. This was the Ziggurat of Babylon, a structure so grand it was believed to have reached the heavens. According to ancient texts, this monumental ziggurat was dedicated to the god Marduk, a central figure in Babylonian religion. It is said to have been adorned with gold and lapis lazuli, precious materials that symbolized wealth and divine favor. Yet today, only fragments remain, broken steps leading up a crumbling slope, a testament to the relentless march of time. The absence of the ziggurat's former glory is both its defining feature and its most potent source of mystery. Historians and archaeologists have pieced together its likely appearance based on written accounts and comparisons with similar structures, but the true colors and intricacies of its design remain unknown. Perhaps they will never be fully known. This lack of definitive knowledge invites us to fill in the blanks, to imagine what this mighty tower might have looked like when it graced the Babylonian skyline. In the absence of hard evidence, we are left with a profound sense of wonder and the freedom to create our own mental images of the ziggurat's magnificence. Our journey takes us now to the famed Hanging Gardens, a place whose very existence has been questioned and debated by scholars. Unlike the ziggurat, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon have no physical remains, only descriptions from ancient travelers who marveled at their beauty. According to these accounts, the gardens were a series of elevated platforms laden with exotic plants and cascading waterfalls, a verdant oasis within the heart of a bustling city. Some believed these gardens were a gift to a queen, a token of affection from a beloved king. Others saw them as a symbol of Babylon's power and prestige, a showcase of the king's wealth and dominion over nature itself. However, as impressive as these tales are, they have sparked skepticism among some historians who argue that the Hanging Gardens may be nothing more than a myth. They point to the lack of any physical evidence and question the accuracy of ancient descriptions. Without artifacts or remains, it's impossible to say with certainty whether the Hanging Gardens ever existed. This uncertainty only adds to their mystique, inviting us to contemplate the nature of historical truth. Were the Hanging Gardens a product of Babylonian engineering and artistry, or did they exist only in the realm of legend? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between fact and fiction. Both the Ziggurat and the Hanging Gardens offer us glimpses into the hearts and minds of those who came before us. They show us a world where the boundaries between reality and imagination were often blurred, where great feats of engineering were intertwined with religious devotion, and where gardens could defy gravity itself. While we may never know the complete stories behind these enigmatic places, their absence speaks to us across the ages, urging us to dream, to imagine, and to seek out the hidden wonders of our world. So, if you ever find yourself wandering through the ruins of Babylon, take a moment to look beyond the crumbling walls. Picture the ziggurat reaching for the heavens and the Hanging Gardens cascading with life. Let your imagination run wild, for in doing so, you will be embracing the true spirit of these ancient marvels. And when you return home, carry with you the sense of wonder and the questions they inspire. Did the ziggurat gleam with gold and lapis lazuli? Did the Hanging Gardens truly defy gravity? Or were they merely a figment of a long-ago tale? These questions, like the ruins of Babylon, will echo in your thoughts long after you've left, reminding you of the enduring power of the past. In my last video, I discussed some of the ancient world's most enduring mysteries. These are stories from across the globe that have endured for thousands of years, but remain unsolved to this day. Click here to watch the video if you haven't already. But while the discoveries from Nineveh and other sites are truly amazing, there is one artifact that I can't stop thinking about, one object from the ancient past that seems to be calling out to me across the ages. It's a small piece of wood just 13 centimeters long, found in the ruins of an ancient city. But this tiny artifact may hold the secret to unlocking one of history's greatest mysteries. That's because it was discovered in the ruins of King Solomon's legendary palace. You see, according to the Bible, Solomon ruled over a vast empire that stretched from Egypt to Turkey. He was known throughout the ancient world for his wisdom, wealth, and power. But what did he look like? We don't know. No portraits of Solomon exist, and no one has any idea what he looked like. That is, until now. What we have here is a small piece of wood that once served as the handle for a ceremonial scepter. In the hands of a king, this simple staff would have been a symbol of authority and power, and now it may have revealed what King Solomon really looked like. You see, the scepter was discovered at the City of David archaeological site, which dates back to the 10th century BC. This was at the height of Solomon's power and right around the time that he ruled over Israel. And what makes this find so remarkable is the inscription on the scepter handle itself. It reads, LMLK, which stands for Lekmek, king. In other words, this was a royal scepter used by a king, possibly even King Solomon himself. Now, before we go any further, please remember that mainstream archaeologists have disputed these findings. They argue that there's no way to prove that this scepter really belonged to King Solomon. However, other experts believe that the discovery of the seal proves that the biblical account of Solomon's reign is true. It is possible that this scepter was used by Solomon himself when he received visitors or during important religious ceremonies. This was a common practice among many ancient kings, who often used symbols of power and authority to project an image of strength and dominance. What's interesting about this particular scepter is that it was discovered alongside other artifacts that date back to the 10th century BC, including a jar with the name of King Ahab written on it. This suggests that the artifact could very well have been from the time of Solomon's reign, which lasted from 970 to 931 BC. Additionally, the seal's inscription is consistent with other artifacts found in Jerusalem, such as a jar bearing the inscription Lekmek, Lamelch. This provides further evidence that the seal may have belonged to a member of the royal family. There's also another artifact that may help us understand the significance of the scepter. A similar scepter was discovered in the ruins of Megiddo, which was a city in northern Israel during the time of Solomon. The scepter found in Megiddo also bears the inscription Lekmek, king, suggesting that they may have been used by a member of the royal court to signify their status and authority. While the scepter itself may not be a groundbreaking discovery, its inscription and the artifacts found alongside it provide valuable insights into the political climate of ancient Israel. The inscription Lekmek, king, is a direct command to those who serve the king to obey his orders without question. It was a way of enforcing obedience and maintaining control. Additionally, the use of the phrase king instead of the divine title my king suggests that the ruler was seen as an absolute monarch with supreme authority. Overall, the seal's inscription helps us understand how ancient monarchs projected their power and authority. It also gives us a glimpse into the relationship between the ruler and those who served him. By studying these interactions, we can better understand the political dynamics of ancient Israel and the role that symbols of power played in maintaining social order. So, what do you think? Is this artifact proof that we can trust the Bible more than we thought? Or are there other explanations for the seal's inscription and the artifacts found alongside it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching. Up until now, you have walked the muddy streets of Babylon, felt the weight of Hammurabi's laws, and gazed upward at towering ziggurats and imagined gardens of wonder. But life in Babylon was not the same for everyone. While most toiled in fields or shops, some lived in a world of privilege and influence. The priests, scribes, and nobles who inhabited the palaces and temples. Here, daily life unfolded with a rhythm unlike that of the common people. It was a life framed by ceremony, by careful ritual, and by the knowledge that power rested in their hands. You are a priestess of Ishtar, the goddess of love and fertility. Your day begins before the sun with a ritual cleansing in the temple bath. The water, perfumed with cedar wood and myrrh, washes away the grime of the city and the memory of yesterday. As you dry yourself with linen cloth, you touch the cold pencil to your eyelids, drawing lines of protection against the evil eye. Today is a day of ceremony. You will lead the morning prayers to Ishtar, a litany of praise and supplication that asks the goddess to bless the fields, the flocks, and the city with her favor. You pace the length of the temple, your ankles clicking on the stone floor as you chant the sacred words. Behind you, the other priestesses sway, their voices rising and falling like the tide. After the prayer, you turn to the tasks of the day. You must anoint the sacred images of Ishtar, each one a masterpiece of Babylonian sculpture, with oil and dust. The work is not onerous. For you, it is a quiet conversation with the divine, a communion made possible through the grease and the grime. You linger over the images, tracing the curves of their bodies with your fingertips, whispering words of devotion in their ears. When you are finished, the images are resplendent, their surfaces gleaming, their features brought back to life. They seem almost human, so real they appear. And for a moment, you can believe that the goddess herself might step down from her pedestal and walk among the living. As the midday heat bears down on Babylon, you seek the shade of the courtyard, sipping cool wine from a reed cup and watching the date palms sway in the breeze. It has been a hot, dry summer, and the river's edge is a gathering place for gossiping women, their voices raspy with thirst. You know better than to trust the murmurings of the people, but you listen anyway. The king's son is ill, they say, struck down by a fever that burns like the breath of the desert. The queen is in a frenzy, they say, calling every healer in the city to try their hand. The king is preparing for war, they say, mustering chariots and archers on the eastern ramparts. You set the cup down, the clay cold beneath your fingers. There is nothing in the river today, not even the comforting flow of its current. Only rumors drift across the water, shadows that have no substance. Still, you know the river will keep its secrets close, just as the priests of Marduk guard the secrets of the ziggurat. As the sun begins its slow descent, you return to the temple chambers. You change into a white linen gown, then don the heavy ceremonial garments, each fold and pleat imbued with meaning and magic. Tonight, there is an important ceremony, a marriage by proxy between the king and a local lord's daughter. You must ensure everything is perfect. You pace the room, checking each item on the list. The bride's gown, a cascade of gold and blue, embroidered with scenes from the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the hero king journeys to the ends of the earth and discovers the secret of immortality. The bridal veil, a shimmering cloud of gauze that will hide the bride's face until she reaches the altar. The groom's headdress, a tall crown of gold that symbolizes his status and the sacredness of the union. Everything is in order. You breathe a sigh of relief. When the procession arrives, you step forward to receive them, your heart pounding in your chest. This is the most important ceremony of the year, a union that will bind noble families and ensure the prosperity of Babylon. As the crowd parts, you see them, the bride and groom, their faces obscured by veils and finery. You reach out to guide them, your fingers brushing the bride's arm. She shivers. You offer a reassuring smile. It will be all right, you promise, even though you know the road to the altar is long and fraught with peril. Even the gods could not have planned a smoother path, and as you watch them disappear into the temple, you whisper a prayer that the goddess will smile upon them and grant them a union as eternal as her own. In this series, we try to imagine what daily life was like in the ancient world. We've looked at market day in ancient Athens, a Roman senator's bath, and even the inside of an Egyptian pyramid. But today, let's look at something different. Let's look at the priests of ancient Babylon. You awaken before sunrise in your modest home near the Temple of Marduk. It is not a grand house, but it is comfortable. Your neighbors are fellow priests and scholars, and beyond them, the great ziggurat of Asagila pierces the sky. It has many stories, but you have never climbed it to its peak, where only the chief priest is permitted to offer sacrifices to the highest gods. After washing your hands and face, you don your priestly garments, a white linen robe over a woolen one. Your head is shaved except for a small braid behind your ear, and you smell pleasantly of myrrh and cinnamon. You join the other priests in the courtyard for your morning ritual, the recitation of the divine Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. Together you chant of the watery chaos that was before the world, of Tiamat, the monster slain by Marduk to create the heavens and earth. Then comes the moment when the sun rises over the horizon, and you turn to face east as one. And together you call out to the gods, "Oh, gods, revive our hearts. Oh, lords, grant health to our bodies. As surely as you made the day and the night, as surely as you fashioned the heavens, and the earth as surely as you gave breath to the offspring of men, so to give vigor to our bodies, that we may do your bidding." Your duties today include inspecting the previous day's sacrifices and offerings to see if the gods were pleased or not. If all is well, it will be a minor affair, just a burnt offering of incense or some fruit or dates. But occasionally, there are larger offerings, the remains of a bull sacrifice to drive out an evil spirit that has been troubling a family, or a pig offered up to ensure a bountiful harvest. Sometimes the offerings sit overnight, and then you must decide how to dispose of them. There is no plumbing in the temple, so waste must be carried out. It is unpleasant work, but someone must do it. After the duties of the morning are done, you may have time for your own devotions. Unlike the major gods of the Babylonian pantheon, whose temples were huge complexes of pillared halls and courtyards, the shrines of the minor gods were simpler affairs. A niche in the wall, perhaps a bit of statuary, maybe a small altar. You step into the sanctuary of Nebo, god of wisdom and writing, and lay out your reed stylus and the wax tablet that awaits your inscription. You are also skilled in healing, and after a quick prayer, you mix some oil and perfume and anoint your hands. A sick child awaits you in the outer temple, a girl who has fallen ill with a fever. Her parents watch anxiously while you feel her forehead and ask questions. Then you go to work, your fingers deftly applying the proper unguents and charms to drive out the fever and restore the child to health. As the day grows late, you join the other priests in the main temple hall for the evening sacrifice. You process in solemn silence behind the chief priest, each carrying an offering of incense or some fruit. The chief priest leads the way, his white beard flowing in the temple wind, and he alone breaks the silence. He speaks to the assembled priests, reminding them of their duty to the gods and to the king, for the priests of Babylon were not merely religious figures, they were also the king's advisors and administrators. The king relied on them to keep order in the city, to collect taxes and to settle disputes. When the king goes to war, it is the priests who keep the city safe. When the king's son is born, it is the priests who determine his fate. And now, as the evening sacrifice is about to begin, the chief priest turns to you, the newest priest, and asks you to perform the ritual washing of the king's son, Hammurabi, who is 12 years old today. The boy watches you intently as you complete the ritual. You wash his hands and feet, anoint him with oil and perfume, dress him in a long robe and place a crown upon his head. He looks at you with wide eyes, and for a moment, you think he understands the weight of the ritual. Then he grins and tussles your beard, and you smile back, knowing that one day soon he will be the one holding the crown. When the boy is gone, the sacrifice continues. The priests file past the altar, each offering incense or fruit to the gods. Then the chief priest steps forward and cuts the throat of a goat, letting its blood run into a basin. The other priests chant, and you join in their litany, asking the gods to accept this sacrifice, to forgive the sins of the living and the dead, and to protect the city of Babylon from harm. The hall is dim with incense smoke and shadows, and you raise your hands in unison with the others, calling out to the gods, "Oh, gods, revive our hearts. Oh, lords, grant health to our bodies." As one, you turn toward the door, the ritual ended, and step out into the cool night air. Babylon sleeps beneath a canopy of stars, and you hurry home, eager for rest before the rising sun ushers in another day of service to the gods. What do you see? What do you see? Do you see what I see? A scribe seated cross-legged on the floor, a small triangular stylus in hand, pressing wedge-shaped marks into damp clay tablets. Do you see him? Then you can hear him, too. Can you hear him? Do you hear what I hear? A steady rhythm, the soft scrape of stylus on clay. Welcome to my channel. Here you can explore ancient Mesopotamia through a series of vignettes. Each episode will transport you to a different location in the ancient world, bringing to life the sights, sounds, and even smells of everyday life in the time of the Babylonians. Put on your virtual goggles and get ready to travel back in time. Here we are then in the 2nd millennium BC. The sun is setting over the Persian Gulf, casting long shadows across the baked brick walls of Babylon. The air is warm, even this late in the day. You can feel it on your skin, a gentle breeze rustling through the nearby palm trees, carrying with it the scent of fresh water from the river. The sound of hammers and chisels echoes nearby as a mason finishes work on a new palace wall. Children's laughter rings out from a nearby courtyard as a group of boys kick a leather ball around a crude hoop. It's almost a peaceful scene. And here you are again, sitting cross-legged on the floor, a small triangular stylus in hand, pressing wedge-shaped marks into damp clay tablets. The air is filled with the steady rhythm of stylus on clay. The rhythmic scraping continues all around you. There must be hundreds of scribes at work here, each with his own task. A quick glance around the room shows you why. Shelves line every available space, crammed with clay tablets, each one an archive of the city's history. The walls are covered with a layer of beehive-shaped clay stacks, each containing dozens more tablets. The air is thick with dust, and you can smell the scent of drying clay on everything. It clings to the scribes' tunics, their tablets, even their skin. You cough, hoping it won't ruin the concentration you need to do your work. A scribe's work was meticulous and demanding. Their days begin before sunrise and end after dark. They recorded trade, taxes and laws, copied hymns, prayers and myths, drafted letters for the king and contracts for merchants. Without them, the city's administration could not function, but being a scribe was more than a job. It was a status. To be literate in Babylon was rare. Not everyone could read or write. Scribes came from elite families with the means to afford an education. Some were even slaves or foreigners who'd been captured in war. Most were men, but there were a few women, too. Learning cuneiform took years. A scribe had to memorize hundreds of signs and the order in which to write them. They also needed to know arithmetic and be able to use a rudimentary kind of algebra. They were the key to the city's bureaucracy, its history, and to memory itself. You dip your stylus into the wet clay and press it firmly onto the tablet before you, forming the sign for water. You continue your list of transactions, recording who bought what, when, and for how much. It is important work, and you take pride in your role. Every mark you press into the clay is a voice carried across time, many of them reaching us even now. When the clay is dry, you break off the top, leaving a neat edge. You roll it out, flatten it, score lines along its length, and make sure it is smooth. It is ready to be baked in the sun, which will harden it into permanent records, records of the transactions, the receipts for grain, the records of land ownership, the record of the king's law code. They will all be written on clay tablets like this. And it is the scribes who make it all possible. It has been a busy day, and the light is fading fast. Soon the other scribes will pack up their things and go home, but you have one more tablet to finish. The king's seal awaits. Your work is done for the day. You stand up, stretching stiff muscles, and leave your stool. In the gathering darkness, you pick up your tunic and adjust it on your shoulder. It has been a long day and you are tired, but tomorrow you will be back here, seated on the floor, a small triangular stylus in hand, pressing wedge-shaped marks into damp clay tablets. Do you hear that? Can you hear it? The steady rhythm of stylus on clay. Join me next time here on my channel, where you can explore ancient Mesopotamia through a series of vignettes. Each episode brings you to a different location in the ancient world, bringing to life the sights, sounds, and even smells of everyday life in the time of the Babylonians. Until then, stay safe and remember, you are awesome. And then there were the nobles, the court officials, and the king himself. Step with me into the palace. The halls are spacious, the walls decorated with colored tiles. Servants move quietly in the background, carrying food, water, and messages. Life in the palace was one of luxury compared to the city streets outside. Meals were rich, bread baked from the best grain, dates soaked in honey, meat seasoned with herbs. Music drifted through the rooms, played on lyres and drums. Conversations revolved around politics, trade, and the latest campaigns of war. Yet, even here, life was not entirely carefree. Nobles owed loyalty to the king, and the king himself lived under the ever-present shadow of both divine will and human ambition. An ill omen seen in the stars could cause unease, and alliances could shift overnight. Power, though glittering, was never fully secure. Let us begin our tale at the royal table, where the king is served first. He eats from a golden plate, his throne made of ivory. The queen sits beside him, her head crowned with jewels. The other nobles wait patiently for their turn to be served. They have come from distant lands, each bringing their own culture and customs to this court. There is the ambassador from the south, withered and wise from years of travel. Beside him sits a young lord, eager to prove himself in the king's eyes. A lady of the court fans herself with a palm leaf, her gaze fixed on the king. Across from her, a general discusses military strategy, his face etched with the scars of past battles. All of them are important, all of them influential, but none can predict what turn fate will take. For the king's nephew, it is a night like any other until a visitor arrives. The newcomer is unexpected, a wandering sage who has journeyed from beyond the mountains. He speaks of a hidden valley untouched by war, a place where the river flows with milk and the fields are filled with honey. The king is intrigued. Could such a place exist? Could his people find refuge there? The sage smiles mysteriously and says, "Where there is sweetness, there must also be bitterness." The king does not understand. The sage continues, "You seek peace, but peace is not found in valleys or on mountains. It is found within yourself. The king is confused. The sage, seeing the king's bewilderment, decides to depart, leaving behind a single white feather as a gift. That night, the king cannot sleep. The feather floats in his mind like a leaf in the wind. What did the sage mean? Is there no escape from his troubles? As dawn breaks, he summons his advisers. Among them is the lady who fanned herself at the dinner table. She is known for her cunning and sharp tongue. The king tells them about his conversation with the sage, about the hidden valley and the cryptic message. The others discuss it, each trying to outdo the other in offering solutions. The lady remains silent, but when it is time for the king to make a decision, she speaks up. She suggests honoring the sage and sending men to find the hidden valley. The king agrees. The preparations begin. The men are ready to set out, but the lady stops them. She says, "You forget something." The king looks at her, puzzled. She points to his feet. He looks down to see that his fine slippers are not fit for traveling. The men laugh, realizing the king's oversight. One of the lords steps forward and says, "Your Majesty, let me go in your place." The king hesitates, then agrees. The lord takes the slippers and the white feather as gifts and departs. Days turn into weeks and the lord does not return. The king grows impatient. Did his counselor send him away to take his place? To check her motives, the king asks the general for a favor. "I want you to do as I have done," the king says. Handing over his slippers, the general is confused, but obedient. He sets out, taking the slippers with him. Again, the lady stops him. She says, "You forget something." The general looks at her, puzzled. She points to his armor. He looks down to see that his heavy war clothes are not fit for walking. The men laugh, and the general, realizing his folly, returns to the palace. This time, the king is furious. He confronts the lady, who defends herself by saying, "I only wanted to test your men." The king, however, sees through her facade. He realizes that she has tricked him twice, and so he banished her from the court. The lady leaves, defeated. As the sun sets, the king sits alone, the white feather in his hand. He understands now that the lady was right. His troubles are of his own making. The only way to end them is to find the hidden valley within himself. With newfound determination, he rises from his throne and begins the long journey inward, leaving the viewers to ponder the meaning of the cryptic message and the significance of the white feather. Is this the greatest city the world has ever seen? Is this the home of unimaginable luxury and pleasure? Is this the place where all the world's wonders converge? Welcome to Babylon. It is in these contrasts that the true shape of Babylon emerges. Outside the palace walls, workers labored in the dust, their lives measured by the flood of the Euphrates and the demands of tax collectors. Inside, priests traced omens, scribes etched words into clay, and nobles dined in candle-lit halls. All of them, though separated by class and privilege, shared the same city. They walked the same streets, prayed to the same gods, and lived under the same relentless Mesopotamian sun. The year is 600 BCE, and this is the first episode of a series all about the great ancient city of Babylon. We'll explore how its legendary king Nebuchadnezzar built his empire, how it became the most luxurious city in the ancient world, and what ultimately led to its demise. As we cross the river Euphrates, we enter the city through the famed Ishtar Gate. Built by Nebuchadnezzar, it was originally painted a brilliant blue and decorated with 120-foot-tall glazed bricks depicting lions, dragons, and the goddess Ishtar herself. We pass through the gate and make our way down the processional way lined with palm trees and flower beds. The road eventually opens up into a large plaza dominated by the massive Ziggurat of Marduk. This temple to the patron god of Babylon was once over 200 feet tall and could be seen for miles across the plain. At its base were the royal apartments, where the king would stay when he was entertaining guests in the palace. Our procession continues on to the royal palace complex, a labyrinth of pillared halls and courtyards. It's here that King Nebuchadnezzar receives ambassadors from distant lands. He's received tribute from the defeated Jews, Lydians, and Egyptians, But the gift he's most proud of is the massive golden crown brought by his general, Amadis, who just returned from conquering the kingdom of Elam. With this victory, Babylon was now the dominant power in Mesopotamia. But not everyone is so pleased with the spoils of war. Nebuchadrezzar's advisors are quick to point out that while Babylon is wealthy, it lacks beauty. That will change soon with the arrival of a delegation of artists and architects from the recently conquered city of Ashur. They will take the designs they learned in their home city and apply it to the palaces of Babylon. Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, life is very different. The majority of people living in Babylon are poor, working as farmers or laborers. Many have been reduced to poverty due to high taxes levied by the king. Nebuchadnezzar has grand plans for the city, and he is not afraid to work the populace hard to achieve them. A group of workers are busy digging a new canal to divert fresh water from the river Euphrates. The project is dangerous and back-breaking, but the workers have no choice but to comply when the tax collector comes to demand that they pay their quota for the year. If they fail to meet their numbers, the penalty is brutal. In the evening, the workers return home to the poor district of the city. Here the streets are narrow and the houses are made of mud brick. Most people in Babylon live like this, in cramped quarters with little access to fresh water or even basic medicine. A family is gathered around their small fire-eating dinner when a traveling merchant comes by to sell his wares. The family is too poor to buy much, but the merchant is happy to accept whatever small amount they can offer in exchange for his goods. As the family sleeps, a young boy looks up at the stars and dreams of a better life. He wishes he could be an astronomer and spend his nights charting the heavens from the palace library rather than sleeping on the cold ground. But he knows that his place is among the working poor and that his future is predetermined. When the sun rises, he joins the other children playing in the street. One of the boys pulls out a small statuette of Marduk, the patron god of Babylon, and they all bow their heads in prayer, asking for the god's favor in the coming day. After a morning of play, the children are sent out to help their families with their various tasks. The girl gathers fresh water from a public fountain while the boy hauls a cart full of grain through the marketplace. As he walks, he sees firsthand the wealth and luxury that surrounds him. The marketplace is filled with merchants from all over the ancient world. A merchant from Persia displays colorful textiles, while another from India shows off rare spices. Even the foods sold in the market reflect the diversity of Babylon's empire. Merchants hawk pomegranates from Persia, figs from Syria, and dates from Arabia. The boy pauses to admire a cage full of exotic birds being sold by a merchant from Africa. He's never seen anything like them before, and he marvels at their beauty. As the boy makes his way home, he passes the Hanging Gardens, one of the ancient world's 7 wonders. He stops to admire the lush vegetation and intricate system of irrigation that makes this oasis in the desert possible. The gardens were built by Nebuchadnezzar for his wife, Amadis, who misses the green hills of her homeland. But the gardens aren't the only thing keeping Babylon green. Everywhere the boy looks, he sees signs of the city's wealth and power. Wide boulevards lined with palm trees, fountains overflowing with fresh water, and statues of Nebuchadnezzar decorating every public square. Finally, the boy reaches his home and collapses on his bed, exhausted from the day's work. He closes his eyes and dreams of a future where he might one day enjoy the luxuries of Babylonian life. But for now, he must be content to live in the shadow of the great city, working hard to survive another day. The year is 600 BCE, and this is the first episode of a series all about the great ancient city of Babylon. Join us next time as we continue exploring the ancient world's greatest cities. It's time to wrap up our tour of ancient Babylon. If you've been with us for the whole series, thank you for your loyalty. If this is your first episode, welcome aboard. We're so glad you're here. Over the past few episodes, we've explored the Hanging Gardens, the Palace of Nebuchadnezzar, and the Great Ishtar Gate. The procession street lined with towering brick dragons, the Temple of Marduk, and the mysterious but serene area known as the Labyrinth. Each location was fascinating in its own right, a jewel in the crown of one of the world's first great cities. But if you were to ask any Babylonian what made their city so special, they wouldn't point to any particular landmark. They would tell you about the rhythm of life there, the steady pulse that made Babylon not just a city, but a world unto itself. As you reflect on the palace, the temple, and the lives of the privileged, you may notice that rhythm, a gentle ebb and flow that carried through every level of Babylonian society. A rhythm of ritual, of duty, of work and of worship, whether in a humble mud brick hut or a grand palace with courtyards and gardens. Life in Babylon followed patterns shaped by the river, the gods, and the city itself. The Euphrates was not just a source of water and a trade route. It was a living thing, a powerful force that demanded respect and offered bounty to those who lived in harmony with it. Its unpredictable floods were a reminder of nature's power. While its banks provided fertile soil for crops, and its currents carried the boats that sustained the city's economy. Every major festival, every civic project, every aspect of daily life was somehow connected to the river. It was both the giver of life and the taker of life. It shaped the city and its people as surely as the sun and the rain shaped the growth of a plant. Then they were the gods. Whether in the grand temples or in the small shrines that dotted every neighborhood, the presence of the divine was felt everywhere. For the Babylonians, religion was not just a set of beliefs, it was a way of life. The rituals, the prayers, the sacrifices, they were not occasional acts of worship, but an integral part of daily life. The priests were not just spiritual leaders, they were experts in astronomy, mathematics, and medicine, as well as keepers of the city's history and traditions. In the temple complexes, where priests and worshippers gathered, the line between the human and the divine seemed to blur. Statues of the gods came to life through the priests' incantations. The murmur of prayers mingled with the smoke of incense. And in the sacred processions, the gods themselves seemed to walk among their people. Finally, there was the city. Babylon was not just a collection of buildings and streets. It was a microcosm of the universe, a world complete in itself. Its walls were a shield against the chaos of the outside world, and within those walls, everything you could possibly need or want was available. The bustling marketplace, the grand palaces, the serene gardens, all contributed to the rhythm of the city. The rhythm was felt in the steady clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the rhythmic splash of water from the aqueducts, the murmuring of merchants in the bazaars, the laughter of children at play, and the gentle sway of palm trees in the evening breeze. This was the music of Babylon, and perhaps that is why Babylon still lingers in memory, not only as a place of great power and wealth, but as a world complete in itself. Full of hardship and privilege, mystery and routine, grandeur and dust, the rhythm of Babylon continues to echo through the ages, inviting us to lose ourselves in its timeless embrace. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Babylon. If you've been with us for the whole series, we hope you've enjoyed reliving this ancient world. If this is your first episode, welcome. We hope you've been captivated by the wonders of Babylon. Which place from our tour has resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join us now and stay tuned for more exciting journeys to the heart of history. You walk along the river, past houses built from sun-baked brick, and watch the farmers work their fields. The air is thick with the smell of the river, of fresh tilled soil and ripening fruit. It is good to be in Babylon. Your boat has brought you from the distant city of Ur, where you heard the voice of God calling Abraham to leave his homeland and follow the divine light. You saw the ziggurat pierce the clouds at Ur, but here in Babylon, the largest temple you've seen yet looms before you, its summit lost in the mist. This is the most holy place in all the known world. Here in the temple of Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, priests in white robes tend the sacred fire, a fire that must never go out. Here sacrifices are made daily, and the hymns of praise are sung. You feel a presence here, ancient and powerful, and you fall to your knees in awe. Marduk, the patron deity of Babylon, is a warrior god, strong and fierce. His consort, Zarpanet, is a goddess of healing and magic. Together they represent the order and chaos that pervade the universe. In their balance, the universe is held. Your guide tells you that the priests believe Marduk slew the dragon Tiamat, who personified chaos, and from her lifeless form he molded the earth and the heavens. He placed the stars in the sky and set the sun and the moon to rule the day and the night. All life was his. All life was given order by Marduk. As the priests process toward the altar, chanting in unison, you see their long robes decorated with symbols of the cosmos. Each priest is an interpreter of the divine order. They read the signs of the gods in the patterns of the stars, in the flight of birds, in the entrails of sacrificed animals. Their task is to discover the will of the gods and relay it to the king. The king. Yes, you came to Babylon to seek an audience with the mighty Hammurabi, whose empire stretches from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. He is a warrior king, feared and respected throughout the land, but he is also a lawgiver, one who has codified the laws of the empire, making them known as the hammer of his wrath. These laws apply to all subjects, regardless of social status. You heard some of them while strolling through the bustling marketplace, where merchants hawked their wares and artisans displayed their skills. A woman could not be put to death unless she had committed adultery with someone other than her husband. If a son struck his father, he was to have his hand cut off. For a false accusation of witchcraft, a family member would lose their nose and their ears. As you approach the throne room, guards dressed in bright red doublets stand motionless, their hands resting on the hilts of their daggers. Your guide tells you that the king keeps a large army of foot soldiers, charioteers, and cavalrymen to protect the empire from invaders. Beyond the throne room is the royal palace, a maze of courtyards, gardens, and reception rooms. There are apartments for the king and his many wives, as well as rooms for officials and guests. Many of the rooms are filled with treasures from the four corners of the earth, plundered by the armies of Hammurabi, or brought here as tribute by subject kings. You marvel at the riches of the empire as you pass tapestries, gold goblets, chests overflowing with jewels, and intricate works of art depicting scenes from Babylonian mythology. Finally, you enter the king's private garden, a paradise within a paradise. Lush vegetation surrounds a pool teeming with fish. You hear the splash of water as a fountain sends jets of water high into the air. Palm trees sway in the breeze, creating soothing patterns of shade and sunlight on the ground. You sit down on a stone bench and let the sounds of the garden wash over you. Bird song, the buzz of insects, the distant call to prayer from the temple of Marduk. You have seen much during your time in Babylon, the grandeur of the temple, the bustling marketplace, the treasures of the palace. But it is this moment of quiet contemplation that will stay with you the longest. For though Babylon was a city of great wealth and power, it was also a place of great beauty. And nowhere was this beauty more evident than in the king's garden. As the sun begins its slow descent, you know it is time to leave. You walk out of the garden and past the palace walls. The road stretches before you, leading away from Babylon and toward the unknown. You take one last look at the city, at the temple, the palace, and the gardens, and then you turn and walk away. And so our journey through Babylon has come to an end. We trust that you enjoyed exploring this ancient city with us. From the humble beginnings of the city to its rise to become one of the greatest empires of the ancient world, we hope you learned something new and fascinating about Babylon. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more historical adventures. Until next time, farewell. Now, we come gently to the end of our journey. From the reed huts and muddy streets, to Hammurabi's laws, to the great Ziggurats and legendary gardens, and finally into the quiet halls of the palace, you have walked through the many layers of Babylon. Let us rest now in that reflection, and slowly bring this story to a close. Though ancient Babylon is brought to life before our eyes, there is still so much that we do not know. For every artifact uncovered, there are dozens more hidden beneath the surface. For every name carved in stone, there are countless others lost to the sands of time. The stories that we tell about ancient Babylon are like the branches of a tree. reaching outward from a central trunk. But what was that trunk? What force or forces shaped the Babylonians into the people we find in the historical record? What led them to build these great structures only to be forgotten for nearly 2 millennia? These are the questions that drive archaeologists and historians to continue their work in Babylon and other ancient sites. They hope to uncover the trunk of the Babylonian story, but they may never find it. History is never fully known. There are always gaps in the record, things lost to time or simply not recorded in the first place. This is one of the reasons why history is such a fascinating subject. There is always more to discover. As the sun sets over the plains of Babylon, let us think about all the people who toiled and dreamed here thousands of years ago. Let us marvel at the ingenuity of the people who built these great structures without the aid of modern technology. And let us remember that even though ancient Babylon is gone, its legacy lives on in the ruins that we see today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe for more content. We have lots of shows that explore the ancient world, including Engineering the Ancient World, which takes a deep dive into the incredible feats of engineering accomplished by ancient civilizations. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. Until next time, keep exploring. It has been an incredible adventure, hasn't it? We started out at the royal palace, where even kings had to bow to the will of the people. Then we ventured into the bustling marketplace, where merchants hawked their wares and neighbors gossiped over fresh dates and figs. We followed the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer, wandered through fields of barley swaying in the summer sun, and found solace in the cool shade of date palms. We have stood before the mighty Ishtar Gate, marveled at the intricate carvings on the processional way, and witnessed the splendor of Marduk's temple, the seat of the gods on earth. And now we find ourselves here in the peaceful garden, surrounded by the whisper of reeds and the sweet song of birds. Before us lies the majestic Euphrates, its waters reflecting the brilliance of the heavens above. Let us linger here for a while, for this place holds secrets as old as time itself. The great King Nebuchadnezzar II, ruler of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, once called this garden the eighth wonder of the world. Can you imagine? Among the most incredible sights in the ancient world, he placed his very own garden among the wonders of Babylon, a testament to human ingenuity and the unyielding spirit of those who dare to dream big. But what was it about this garden that inspired such awe? What secrets did its lush greenery and tranquil waters hold? And how did it become one of the 8 wonders of the ancient world? As we wander through the pathways of the Hanging Gardens, we can't help but feel a sense of mystery and intrigue. Legend tells us that these gardens were created for the amusement of Queen Amadis, the wife of Nebuchadnezzar II. She missed the lush hills and valleys of her homeland in Media, and her husband, the mighty king, wanted to bring a piece of that beauty to her in Babylon. Imagine the scene. The year is 600 BC, and the mighty King Nebuchadnezzar in search of a unique gift for his beloved wife, Amadis. He wants to make her happy, and he knows that she misses the beautiful hills and valleys of her homeland. So he turns to his royal advisors, architects and engineers, and commissions the creation of a series of elevated gardens filled with all the plants and flowers that his wife loves. The task is daunting, but nothing is impossible for the king. He assembles a team of the most skilled workers and they set to work. They build a series of terraces and plant them with all kinds of trees, shrubs, and flowers. They dig deep wells and create an intricate system of pipes and pumps to water the plants. And when it is finished, the result is nothing short of spectacular. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are born. For Amadis, the gardens are a welcome sight. The lush greenery and colorful flowers remind her of home, and she spends many happy hours strolling through the winding paths and enjoying the beauty all around her. The other Babylonians are equally impressed. The Hanging Gardens quickly become one of the most popular attractions in the city. People come from all over to marvel at the beauty and grandeur of this unique creation. But how exactly were these magnificent gardens built? We don't have all the details, but historians and archaeologists have pieced together a pretty good picture. First off, The gardens were likely built on top of a series of platforms or terraces that were made from brick and supported by arches and vaults. This would have created a raised area where the gardens could be built without taking up too much space. The different levels would have been connected by stairs and ramps, allowing visitors to move from one terrace to another. The plants and trees were likely brought in from all over the empire. The Babylonians were known for their extensive trade network, so they would have had access to a wide variety of plants. To water the gardens, they would have needed a sophisticated system of irrigation. This may have involved a combination of underground channels, pumps, and other devices to bring water from the nearby Euphrates River to the gardens. The entire structure was likely surrounded by a protective wall to keep animals and other potential hazards out, and to make the gardens even more impressive, there may have been statues and other decorations placed throughout. But the construction of the gardens wasn't just an engineering feat. It was also a major undertaking that required the labor of thousands of people. The materials had to be gathered and transported. The platforms had to be built and the plants had to be planted and watered. All of this would have required careful planning and coordination, as well as a lot of hard work. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon became famous throughout the ancient world. People came from all over to see the beauty and grandeur of these magnificent gardens. But they were also a source of pride for the Babylonians. The gardens were a symbol of their city's greatness and a testament to the power and wealth of their empire. But why do we think that these gardens were located in Babylon? Well, that's where the story goes, isn't it? According to ancient texts, the gardens were built by King Nebuchadnezzar II for his wife, Amadis. Babylon was the capital of his empire, so it makes sense that he would have built the gardens there. Plus, there have been archaeological discoveries that suggest that something like this did exist in ancient Babylon. Of course, we can't say for sure if it was exactly what the ancient texts describe, but it's an exciting thought to consider. You can almost hear the laughter of children playing hide and seek among the palm trees, the murmur of lovers strolling hand in hand along the garden paths, the soothing sound of trickling fountains, and the sweet fragrance of flowers filling the air. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon were more than just a tourist attraction. They were a place where people could escape the hustle and bustle of city life and connect with nature. But like all great stories, the tale of the Hanging Gardens doesn't end there. Throughout history, there have been many attempts to uncover the truth behind the legend. Some historians believe that the Hanging Gardens were nothing but a myth, while others believe that they really existed. If they did exist, then where are they now? One theory suggests that the gardens were destroyed during an earthquake, while another theory suggests that they were lost to the sands of time as the city of Babylon declined. But the mystery only adds to the allure of the Hanging Gardens. Whether they existed or not, they continue to capture our imaginations and inspire our dreams of a world filled with beauty and wonder. As we stand here in the ruins of ancient Babylon, we can't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder. The Hanging Gardens may be gone, but their legacy lives on in the stories and legends that have been passed down through the ages. If you enjoyed today's episode, please remember to stay tuned for more exciting adventures. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through time. Until next time, may your days be filled with sunshine and your nights with starlight.